Welcome to 3 a.m. Static. In the stillness of the night, when the world sleeps, the static whispers. Here, we unearth the forgotten, the forbidden, and the unsettling. Tonight's stories will crawl beneath your skin and nest in your thoughts. So turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the static guide you. Before we begin, let us know where and when you're listening from. Drop your country or the exact time you're tuning in, because at 3 a.m., you're never really alone.
Story 1, The Red Stain. The silence of the apartment was broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of an unseen clock, a sound that seemed to amplify the unsettling feeling that had settled over Sarah since she moved in. She'd chosen the apartment for its charm, the high ceilings, the ornate fireplace, the quiet street, but a creeping unease had taken root, a feeling she couldn't shake. It started subtly, a flickering light bulb, a persistent draft, a sense of being watched. But tonight, something far more disturbing had emerged. It was a red stain. She discovered it while unpacking, a small, almost insignificant mark on the worn wooden floorboards beneath the antique writing desk she'd inherited from her grandmother. At first, she dismissed it as a spill, a forgotten drop of wine perhaps, or perhaps some kind of paint. But the closer she looked, the more unsettling it became. The stain wasn't just red, it was a deep, crimson hue, almost unnatural in its vibrancy, like dried blood. Sarah knelt, running a finger across the smooth surface of the stain. It was dry, strangely textured, almost like dried clay rather than a liquid. There was no discernible odor, nothing to indicate its origin. She tried to wipe it away with a damp cloth, but the stain refused to budge, clinging stubbornly to the wood. A chill ran down her spine, a wave of inexplicable dread washing over her. This wasn't just a stain, it was something else entirely. She examined the surrounding floorboards, searching for any further evidence, any clue that might explain the stain's presence. Nothing. The rest of the floor was pristine, the wood polished to a gleaming shine. The only anomaly was that single, crimson mark, a stark contrast to the otherwise immaculate surroundings. The apartment, once a source of excitement, now felt oppressive, the walls closing in on her, the silence heavy with an unspoken dread. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent shivers down her spine. She felt watched, a sense of unseen eyes boring into her back. The comfortable feeling she'd initially felt had been completely replaced by a bone-deep fear. Her logical mind tried to dismiss it. It was just a stain, she told herself. A stain caused by a spilled drink, perhaps. Or maybe it was a result of some old, forgotten incident. But a deeper, more primal fear whispered another story, a tale of blood and violence, of something dark and sinister lurking beneath the surface. She tried to ignore it, to focus on unpacking the rest of her belongings, to distract herself from the growing dread. But the stain was imprinted on her mind, a disturbing image that refused to fade. She couldn't help but wonder about the previous tenant, about the life that had unfolded within these very walls. Had something terrible happened here? Had someone been hurt? That night, sleep eluded her. The image of the red stain played repeatedly in her mind, a macabre slideshow that amplified her fear. She found herself staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city filtering in from outside, each noise intensifying her unease. Every creak and groan of the old building sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching her room. She spent hours researching the building's history online, hoping to find some explanation for the stain, some explanation that could ease her mounting anxiety. She discovered old news articles about the building, tales of disappearances and strange occurrences, accounts dismissed as urban legends or the ramblings of eccentric residents. But these stories only amplified her fear, fueling her imagination. The next morning, she decided to investigate further. She examined the stain again, scrutinizing it under different lights, trying to determine its composition. She used a magnifying glass, searching for any clues, any trace of its origin. Still nothing. The stain remained an enigma, a crimson mystery etched into the heart of her new home. Her search led her to old property records, documents that spoke of the building's history stretching back centuries. She found references to a series of unexplained deaths, incidents that had been swept under the rug, dismissed as accidents or suicides. The official explanations felt flimsy, unconvincing, raising more questions than they answered. A name recurred in several of these historical accounts: Elias Thorne. A shadowy figure, a recluse who had lived in the apartment decades ago. Rumors about him were whispered in hushed tones, tales of strange rituals and occult practices, stories that chilled her to the bone. Could the red stain be somehow connected to Elias Thorne? Was it a remnant of his dark past, a lingering mark of something terrible? Driven by a morbid curiosity, Sarah delved deeper into the local archives, tracing Thorne's history, seeking answers to the haunting mystery of the red stain. She discovered fragmented records, newspaper clippings detailing bizarre incidents, and cryptic entries in old city ledgers. Each piece of information seemed to deepen the mystery rather than solve it. The more she learned about Elias Thorne, the more uneasy she became, the more convinced she was that the red stain was no accident. Days bled into nights as her obsession with the stain consumed her. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by an unsettling vigilance. The apartment, once her sanctuary, had transformed into a prison, its walls closing in on her, suffocating her with an overwhelming sense of dread. She found herself increasingly drawn to the old writing desk, the one beneath which the stain lay hidden. Inside its drawers, she discovered a hidden compartment, containing a collection of old letters and journals, penned in a spidery script. The writing spoke of dark rituals, of forbidden knowledge, of encounters with something beyond human comprehension. The letters were dated, stretching back decades, and they described a series of increasingly disturbing events, culminating in a chilling final entry, the last cryptic words etched just hours before Thorne's sudden and unexplained death. The journal entry spoke of a malevolent entity, a being of immense power, a creature that had somehow become bound to the apartment, its presence felt in every corner, in every shadow. As Sarah pieced together the fragmented narratives, a horrifying truth began to emerge. The red stain wasn't just a stain, it was a mark, a symbol of a dark pact made long ago, a connection to something ancient and malevolent. The chilling realization that the stain was not merely a stain but a manifestation of the dark entity's presence filled her with an overwhelming sense of terror. She was trapped, bound to the apartment, to the ancient evil that lurked within its walls. The red stain was a constant, chilling reminder of her precarious situation, a mark of her fate. The whispers, once faint, now echoed loudly in her ears, the chilling truth now clear: she wasn't simply living in a haunted apartment. She was living in a nexus of ancient evil. And the red stain was the gateway. The scrubbing brush felt inadequate, pathetic even, against the stubborn crimson stain. Sarah had tried everything: bleach, ammonia, even a specialist with cleaner recommended by a frantic call to a bewildered hardware store employee. Nothing had worked. The stain remained, a defiant, malevolent blot on the otherwise pristine floorboards, mocking her efforts. It pulsed, or so it seemed, a dull throb of crimson beneath her increasingly frantic scrubbing. The rhythmic scrape of the brush against the wood became a frantic mantra, a desperate attempt to erase not just the stain, but the creeping dread that clung to her like a shroud. The scent of cleaning products, usually a comfort, now only amplified the underlying stench, a metallic tang that hinted at something far more sinister than spilled wine or paint. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it clung to the back of her throat, a phantom taste of blood and something ancient. She staggered back, the brush clattering to the floor, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence of the apartment. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple, mirroring the crimson stain that continued to stare up at her, a mocking reminder of her powerlessness. The apartment, once a haven of quiet charm, had transformed into a prison. The high ceilings now felt like a suffocating cage, the ornate fireplace a cold, menacing monument to her fear. Even the sunlight that streamed through the window seemed to carry a malevolent undertone, illuminating the stain with a grotesque clarity. The quiet street outside, once a source of peaceful solace, now seemed to pulse with unseen threats, a symphony of potential danger. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of the wind against the window panes, jolted her awake, sending waves of icy terror down her spine. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, each passing hour an agonizing eternity filled with the growing dread. The ticking of the clock had transformed from a simple sound into a morbid metronome, counting down to something terrible. She started seeing things. Peripheral movements. Flickering shadows. She checked the hallway, the empty rooms, each time finding nothing except a deepening sense of unease. But then she'd return to the stain and it would be there again, mocking her. Her rational mind screamed at her to seek help, to call someone, anyone. But a deeper, more primal fear held her captive, a paralyzing dread that kept her tethered to the apartment, to the stain, to whatever dark force resided within its walls. The stories she'd unearthed about Elias Thorne and the unsettling occurrences within the building fueled her growing paranoia. His dark legacy clung to the apartment like the stubborn red stain. It was a miasma of dread. She tried to talk about it, to confide in friends and family, but her words felt inadequate, hollow, unable to convey the sheer terror that gripped her heart. They listened, politely, offering words of comfort and reassurance, but their concern felt superficial, unable to penetrate the wall of dread that had surrounded her. They suggested stress, exhaustion, maybe even a touch of hypochondria. They could not see the stain, they couldn't smell the metallic tang, they didn't feel the cold dread that chilled her to the bone. They couldn't understand. Her research deepened. She spent hours poring over ancient city records, tracking down obscure historical societies, and contacting experts in the occult. She found mentions of Thorne's experiments, his involvement with a secretive order, their rituals shrouded in cryptic symbolism, their motives dark and impossible to fully comprehend. The words hinted at something ancient, something malevolent, something that transcended the boundaries of the human comprehension. One particularly chilling document hinted at a blood sacrifice, a ritual to bind a powerful entity to the apartment. The descriptions were vague, obscured by time and intentionally coded language, but Sarah felt a chilling familiarity in the symbols, in the narrative. They mirrored the unsettling texture of the stain, its unnatural vibrancy. It wasn't just blood, she realized with a sickening certainty. It was something more. It was a part of the ritual, a lasting scar left on the fabric of the building itself. The letters she'd found in the hidden compartment, penned by Thorne himself, revealed a descent into madness, a growing obsession with forbidden knowledge, and a terrifying transformation. He described a creature of immense power, a being that responded to a specific, terrifying ritual, a being that bled crimson. His final entry spoke of success in his unholy rite, of the entity's binding to the very heart of the apartment, and of his own utter subjugation to its will. His last words were chillingly simple: the stain will remain. She reread the sentence several times. The stain will remain. He hadn't meant the stain as a simple marking, he had meant its essence, its very being, which echoed the terrifying power of the entity it signified. The blood, in actuality, wasn't blood, but the essence of the entity's being, a tangible manifestation of its presence. The constant, gnawing feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a fleeting sensation anymore. It was a palpable presence, a weight in the air, a chilling sense of malevolence that permeated every corner of the apartment. She felt the entity's presence acutely, feeling its cold gaze penetrate her very soul. She started to notice strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, whispers in the silence, shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. And the stain? It pulsed faintly in the dim light, a malignant heart beating in the very floor beneath her feet. The whispers grew louder, and more tangible. They were no longer the phantom sounds of a haunted apartment, they were the chilling pronouncements of a malevolent power. Sarah realized with stark horror that she wasn't simply living in a haunted apartment, she was living in a nexus of ancient evil. The red stain wasn't just a stain. It was a symbol, a conduit, a gateway. And she, trapped by a morbid curiosity and a creeping sense of dread, was caught in its malevolent embrace. The apartment was no longer just a place to live, but a living nightmare, the crimson stain its horrifying centerpiece, a stark, permanent reminder of the unholy pact that had been made and the chilling truth that it would never, ever be erased. The cold certainty that this was the start of her own terrifying descent into the abyss settled upon her, freezing her to her core, as the echoing whispers of the entity's presence grew louder and more insistent, each one a harbinger of the terror to come. The discovery came not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet rustle of aged parchment. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city archives, she found it, a faded ledger detailing the transactions of Elias Thorne, the apartment's original owner. The ledger wasn't filled with mundane financial records. Instead, it was a cryptic chronicle, a bizarre blend of mundane accounting and chillingly esoteric entries. Thorne, it seemed, wasn't just a wealthy eccentric. He was a collector of rare artifacts, a scholar of the occult, and a practitioner of forbidden arts. The entries detailed the acquisition of seemingly innocuous objects, an antique chalice, a weathered grimoire, a collection of unsettlingly ornate daggers. But the accompanying notations hinted at something far more sinister. Phrases like the summoning, the binding, and the crimson pact peppered the ledger, interspersed with alarmingly precise measurements and symbolic diagrams. Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. The diagrams bore a disturbing resemblance to the intricate patterns she'd seen etched into the floorboards beneath the stain. The more she delved into the ledger, the clearer the picture became. Thorne hadn't simply been obsessed with the occult, he'd been actively attempting to summon and bind a powerful entity. The rituals described were horrific, involving blood sacrifices and incantations spoken in a language Sarah couldn't decipher, yet somehow instinctively understood on a visceral level. The crimson stain, she now realized, wasn't just spilled blood, it was a residual manifestation of the entity's presence, a lingering scar on the very fabric of the apartment. One entry stood out, scrawled in a frantic hand, the ink smeared and blotted as if written in a desperate rush. It responds to the crimson. The pact is complete. But it demands more. The subsequent entries became increasingly erratic, a descent into madness punctuated by chilling pronouncements and desperate pleas for an escape from an unseen horror. The final entry was simply a single, chilling word, consumed. The ledger didn't reveal the entity's nature, but its power was palpable in the very words on the page. It was something ancient, something malevolent, something that existed beyond the realm of human comprehension. Sarah felt a wave of icy dread wash over her. She wasn't just dealing with a haunted apartment, she was dealing with something far older, far more powerful, and utterly beyond her ability to control. Armed with this horrifying knowledge, Sarah sought out experts, historians, occultists, even a skeptical but intrigued forensic anthropologist. The historian confirmed Thorne's existence and his reputation as a recluse with an unhealthy obsession with the supernatural. The occultist, a wizened woman with eyes that seemed to pierce through Sarah's very soul, confirmed her suspicions about the rituals described in the ledger. They were undeniably real, terrifyingly effective, and connected to an entity far beyond her understanding. The anthropologist, after analyzing photographs of the stain, confirmed the presence of unusual blood components that defied known biological classifications. It wasn't human blood, and it wasn't animal blood. It was something else entirely. The weight of her discovery pressed down on Sarah, a crushing burden of knowledge she could barely bear. She was no longer just scared, she was terrified. The apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, a prison built of ancient evil and sealed by a crimson stain that pulsed with a malignant life of its own. The whispers, once faint and indistinct, intensified, becoming clearer, more menacing. They were no longer whispers, they were guttural pronouncements, chilling pronouncements that echoed through the very structure of the building, a symphony of malice designed to erode her sanity. The subtle movements she had noticed before became bolder, more overt. Objects rearranged themselves. Doors creaked open and shut in the dead of night. Shadows writhed and danced in the periphery of her vision, mocking her attempts to rationalize what was happening. Sleep became a torturous battle against the relentless assault on her senses, a constant struggle to escape the ever-present feeling of being watched, scrutinized by something ancient and malevolent. The entity, bound to the apartment by Thorne's desperate ritual, was testing its limits, probing the boundaries of its prison, and Sarah was its unwilling participant. She tried to leave, of course. She packed her bags, ready to escape this living nightmare. But an unseen force seemed to hold her back, a paralyzing dread that kept her rooted to the spot. Each attempt to leave was met with an escalating barrage of paranormal activity, escalating to the point that she feared that she couldn't even reach the door. As she approached the exit, the whispers morphed into a cacophony, a chorus of unsettling sounds that seemed to wrap around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. The shadows coalesced, thickening, forming grotesque shapes at the edges of her vision. She felt a physical resistance, an unseen force pushing against her, preventing her escape. The stain, once a disturbing anomaly, now served as a focal point, a pulsating nexus of the malevolent energy emanating from the entity. It throbbed with an unnatural luminescence, a crimson beacon of unspeakable evil. The closer she got to the door, the more intense the pulsation became, the louder the whispers grew. It was as if the apartment itself was fighting to keep her inside, trapped within the malevolent embrace of the entity. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, sharper, mingling with the cloying scent of decay, of something ancient and vile, something that defied all human understanding. She retreated, defeated, back into the heart of the apartment, where the whispers were somehow less terrifying. The days bled into one another, each one a monotonous repetition of fear, exhaustion, and the growing certainty that she was facing an enemy far beyond human comprehension. She was isolated, alone, with only her research and her growing dread as companions. She'd found another piece to the puzzle, a tattered photograph tucked into the back of the ledger, a group photograph of Thorn and several other men, standing before a sprawling Gothic mansion. This image provided a tangible link, a visual representation of the secret society Thorn was involved with. The mansion was gone now, a victim of time and decay, or perhaps something more sinister. She knew there were unanswered questions, other mysteries she couldn't yet grasp. This feeling, this creeping dread, was not only a horror she was experiencing but a mystery she was trying to unravel. The apartment, once her safe haven, had become her prison. The once comforting sounds of the city outside now echoed the chilling whispers in the apartment, a cruel reminder of her isolation. She was adrift in a sea of fear, clinging to the tattered shreds of her sanity, haunted by the crimson stain and the chilling certainty that she was a prisoner, a pawn in a horrifying game played by forces beyond her understanding. The relentless, chilling presence of the entity threatened to consume her, to extinguish her hope, and silence her forever. And, with every passing moment, the red stain pulsed, a chilling testament to her inescapable fate. The relentless horror of her situation threatened to overwhelm her, leaving her with only the growing dread and the ominous whispers as companions in her desperate fight for survival. The air grew thick, heavy with a scent that defied description, a metallic tang mingling with the cloying sweetness of decay, a perfume of ancient evil that clung to the back of her throat. It wasn't just a smell, it was a presence, a palpable weight pressing down on her, suffocating her with its malevolent energy. The crimson stain, the focal point of this horror, pulsed with a sickening rhythm, its luminescence growing brighter, more intense. It wasn't merely a stain anymore, it was a living thing, breathing, expanding, its malevolent influence seeping into every corner of the apartment. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, morphing into a cacophony of guttural growls and chilling shrieks that echoed through the very bones of the building. The shadows, once merely suggestive, coalesced into grotesque, writhing forms that danced at the edges of her vision, their movements fluid and unnatural, like something from a nightmare made flesh. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at her, threatening to overwhelm her senses, to drown her in a sea of terror. She stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence that had fallen over the apartment, a silence pregnant with impending dread. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, a tangible force that pressed against her skin, chilling her to the bone. She felt a pull, a tugging sensation drawing her towards the stain, an irresistible force compelling her to approach the source of this horrifying power. Against her better judgment, against the desperate scream of her instincts, she found herself moving towards the stain. Each step was an agonizing battle against the paralyzing terror that threatened to consume her. The whispers intensified, swirling around her like a vortex of malevolent energy, their voices a chorus of condemnation, mocking her futile struggle. The shadows pressed in closer, their grotesque forms becoming more defined, more menacing, their silent promise of annihilation echoing in the air. As she reached the center of the stain, the pulsing luminescence intensified, bathing the room in an eerie, crimson glow. The air vibrated with an almost unbearable energy, a tangible power that threatened to tear her apart. She felt a searing pain, a burning sensation that spread through her veins, a horrifying intrusion into her very being. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a chorus of voices merging into a single, terrifying roar that shattered the silence, shaking the very foundations of the apartment. Then, darkness. She awoke to the sound of dripping water, a rhythmic plop 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 that echoed eerily in the oppressive silence. Her head throbbed, a dull ache that intensified with every heartbeat. The crimson glow was gone, but the metallic scent of blood and decay lingered, heavy in the air. Her body ached, her muscles screaming in protest. She felt weak, drained, as if a part of her had been ripped away, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. Slowly, cautiously, she sat up, her eyes scanning the room. The shadows were gone, replaced by the dim light filtering through the dusty windows. The apartment seemed different, quieter. The whispers were gone, replaced by a chilling silence that was far more terrifying. The only sound was the persistent dripping from somewhere in the depths of the apartment. She looked down at her hands, noticing something odd. A small, crimson stain marred her skin, a mirror image of the larger stain on the floor. She touched it, a wave of nausea washing over her as she felt the unnatural warmth emanating from the mark. It wasn't just a stain, it was a connection, a binding to the entity, a chilling reminder of what she had experienced. The sense of dread that had followed her throughout her ordeal intensified, wrapping around her like a shroud. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had happened, it had changed her. The encounter had left an indelible mark, not just on her body but on her soul. The silence, now broken only by the steady drip, drip, drip of the water, was filled with an unseen, malevolent energy, a tangible confirmation of her inescapable entanglement with the apartment's dark legacy. She was no longer just investigating a haunting, she was trapped in the heart of something ancient, something powerful, something deeply, irrevocably evil. The following days were a blur of frantic research, desperate attempts to understand what had happened, and the growing realization that she was utterly alone in her struggle. The historians, the occultists, even the skeptical anthropologists, none of them could fully comprehend the entity she'd faced, the power she'd encountered. Their theories were helpful, offering glimpses into the dark history of the apartment and its previous owner, but none of them could explain the chilling physical manifestation of the entity's presence, the burning pain, the lingering crimson stain. She reread Thorne's ledger, poring over the cryptic entries, searching for clues, for any hint of how to break the bond that now linked her to this ancient evil. The descriptions of the rituals grew increasingly vivid, terrifying in their detail, chilling in their implication. She found a hidden compartment in the ledger, revealing a series of photographs, each more disturbing than the last. They depicted Thorne and his associates performing the rituals described in the journal, their faces contorted in a mixture of ecstasy and terror, their actions a disturbing testament to their unholy pact. One photograph caught her attention, a picture of a strange artifact, a chalice carved from dark obsidian, filled with a viscous, crimson liquid. The chalice was intricately decorated with symbols that mirrored the markings on the floorboards, symbols that pulsed with a dark energy that seemed to reach out to her from the page. A shiver ran down her spine as she recognized the same symbols etched into her own skin. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The stain wasn't just a marking, it was a conduit, a link between her and the entity, a channel through which its power flowed. The ritual hadn't just bound the entity to the apartment, it had bound it to her. She was no longer just a witness, she was a participant, a vessel for the entity's malevolent energy. Panic clawed at her, a desperate urge to break free, to sever the connection, to escape the terrifying reality that had enveloped her. But how? The answers seemed to lie buried deep within the occult texts she'd consulted, cryptic phrases and forgotten incantations hinting at the possibility of a counter-ritual, a way to break the unholy bond that tied her to the entity. The task before her was daunting, fraught with danger, but she knew she had no choice. Her survival, her very sanity, depended on her ability to decipher Thorne's cryptic notes, to understand the nature of the entity, and to find a way to sever the connection before it was too late. The crimson stain, a constant reminder of her precarious situation, pulsed with a malignant energy, its throbbing a sinister metronome counting down the seconds until her inevitable demise. The apartment, once a haven, had become a prison, a cage built from ancient evil, with the crimson stain serving as both its bars and its key. Her battle against the forces of darkness had begun, and with the weight of the unknown crushing her spirit, she knew that she was fighting a war not only for her life, but for her very soul. The last thing she registered before blackness consumed her was the searing pain, a burning brand seared into her very soul. Then, nothing. Silence, broken only by the frantic hammering of her own heart against her ribs. When consciousness returned, it was fragmented, blurry, like a half-remembered dream. The crimson stain, the pulsing malevolence, the whispers, they were fading, retreating into the recesses of her mind, but leaving behind an echoing void, a chilling emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. She was lying on the cold, damp ground outside the apartment building, the chill seeping into her bones, a stark contrast to the infernal heat that had consumed her moments before. The escape itself remained a hazy memory, a series of frantic movements, a desperate scramble for freedom. She didn't recall breaking the door, or even attempting to. It was as if an unseen force had simply unmade the room around her. Had she been pushed? Or had she simply walked through the walls? She sat up, her head swimming, her body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached, her skin felt raw, as if scraped against something abrasive. She looked down at her hands, her breath catching in her throat. The crimson stain, a mirrored echo of the one on the apartment floor, marred her skin, a gruesome testament to the night's horrors. The warmth emanating from it was unsettling, a constant, throbbing pulse that resonated deep within her, a horrifying link to the entity she had barely escaped. The apartment building loomed before her, a silent, menacing monolith, its windows dark, empty eyes staring into the night. It exuded an aura of profound emptiness, devoid of the malevolent energy that had suffocated her only minutes ago. Was it simply her relief speaking, or had the entity truly withdrawn? Had it merely retreated, or had it followed her out? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic surging through her, chilling her to the bone. The air was cold, crisp, carrying the scent of rain and wet pavement, a welcome antidote to the cloying sweetness of decay that still clung to her like a second skin. She stood, unsteady on her feet, the world spinning slightly around her, and stumbled towards the street, her movements clumsy, disoriented. As she walked, she tried to piece together the night's events, the terrifying fragments of memory coalescing into a horrifying whole. The whispers, the shadows, the pulsating stain, each detail a chilling reminder of the peril she had faced. She had come close to dying, to becoming another victim of Thorn's dark rituals, absorbed into the malevolent entity that had claimed the lives of those before her. The city streets, usually bustling with life, felt empty, desolate. The few people she passed seemed distant, their forms blurred, their faces indistinct. It felt as though she were walking through a spectral landscape, detached from reality, existing in a twilight zone between the waking world and the realm of nightmares. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, haunted days, and a relentless pursuit of answers. The crimson stain remained, a constant, throbbing reminder of her ordeal. Doctors dismissed it as a psychosomatic reaction, a manifestation of stress and trauma. But she knew it was more, far more, a tangible link to the ancient evil that continued to haunt her dreams. She attempted to resume her normal life, but it felt impossible. The world seemed different, distorted, as though viewed through a veil of dread. Every shadow held a potential threat, every whisper carried a hidden menace. The constant fear, the relentless tension, chipped away at her sanity, leaving her exhausted and vulnerable. Her initial investigation, once a fascinating journey into the world of the unknown, had transformed into a desperate fight for survival. The apartment, the crimson stain, Thorn's ledger, they were not just historical artifacts but the focal points of a malignant, supernatural force that threatened to consume her. The police remained skeptical, unable to find any evidence of a crime, let alone a supernatural event. Her story, while detailed and compelling, lacked the physical evidence needed to validate her claims. She found herself isolated, her accounts dismissed as the ravings of a woman teetering on the brink of madness. Even her closest friends and family began to distance themselves, concerned for her mental well-being. The lingering trauma, the cryptic allusions to occult practices, and the ever-present crimson stain all served to alienate her, pushing her further into the suffocating loneliness that was slowly consuming her. Her only solace lay in the historical documents and arcane texts she continued to research, hoping to find a way to break the unholy bond that tied her to the entity. She found references to counter-rituals, to methods of severing connections to the supernatural, but the information remained fragmented, obscured by cryptic symbolism and ancient languages. She tried to perform some of the counter-rituals detailed in the texts, but they seemed to exacerbate the connection, intensifying the throbbing pain from the stain. She would awaken drenched in sweat, her body racked with pain, the memory of the crimson light, burning bright, etched into her mind. The uncertainty of her future loomed over her. Was she doomed to forever bear this mark, this connection to the ancient evil? Was there any hope of severing the bond, of escaping the malevolent grasp of the entity? The answer, she suspected, lay hidden within the depths of Thorne's cryptic journal, within the unspoken truths concealed behind the chilling photographs and the arcane symbols. But deciphering its secrets would require more than just knowledge. It would require courage, determination, and a willingness to confront the terrifying truth about the legacy of the apartment, the nature of the entity, and her own increasingly precarious existence. The stain pulsed, a relentless reminder of the fight she had to fight, not just for survival, but for her sanity and her soul. The fight against the darkness had only just begun. And as the chilling silence of the city night surrounded her, she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the game was far from over. The apartment might be behind her, but the entity, the crimson stain, and the horrors that remained, were not. Story 2, The Hex of Hollow Creek. The musty scent of aged paper and decaying wood filled Elias Thorne's small study, a haven cluttered with books, maps, and the detritus of a life dedicated to the unraveling of forgotten histories. He traced a finger along the brittle pages of a leather-bound journal, its faded script whispering secrets from a bygone era. This wasn't just another historical document. This was an anomaly, a chilling account of Hollow Creek, a remote Appalachian community shrouded in mystery and whispered fears. The journal, discovered tucked away in a dusty archive in Charleston, detailed a series of unexplained deaths spanning centuries. Not the usual historical accounts of disease or accident, but something far more sinister. Each entry spoke of sudden, inexplicable fatalities, often accompanied by unsettling circumstances, livestock found mutilated, crops blighted, a pervasive sense of dread clinging to the very air. The common thread, woven through the fragmented entries, spoke of a curse, a dark hex cast by a coven of witches long thought extinct. Elias, a historian with a penchant for the obscure and a fascination with the darker side of Appalachian folklore, found himself inexplicably drawn to Hollow Creek. The journal's chilling narrative had taken root, its tendrils wrapping around his mind, fueling a relentless curiosity that eclipsed all caution. He knew, instinctively, that this was more than just a historical puzzle. This was something far more dangerous. He'd encountered skepticism, even outright hostility, when he'd mentioned his intended research trip to Hollow Creek. The locals, withered and wary, spoke of the place in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously as they warned him to stay away. Their reticence wasn't simply born of rural suspicion. It was steeped in a deep, bone-chilling fear, a knowledge passed down through generations. Tales of shadowy figures flitting through the woods, unearthly howls echoing through the hollows, and a pervasive sense of unease, all contributed to the ominous atmosphere surrounding Hollow Creek. Despite the warnings, Elias felt a pull, an irresistible urge to delve deeper into the enigma. He packed a worn leather satchel, filled with essential supplies, not just pens, paper, and magnifying glasses, but also a well-worn copy of the complete book of Appalachian folklore, and a small, silver crucifix, a relic from his grandmother, a woman known for her sharp wit and even sharper intuition about the unseen world. The journey itself was a descent into a different realm. The paved roads gave way to rutted tracks, winding deeper into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Towering pines cast long shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers, reaching out to embrace the ancient, mist-shrouded hollows. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a perfume both earthy and unsettling. As he neared Hollow Creek, the atmosphere shifted. A palpable silence fell over the landscape, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant caw of a crow. The houses, weathered and gray, clung to the hillside like aged bones, their windows like vacant eyes staring into the deepening twilight. An oppressive stillness hung in the air, punctuated by an almost imperceptible hum that resonated deep within Elias's bones. His arrival was met with a mixture of wary curiosity and outright hostility. The few residents he managed to speak with, mostly aged women with eyes that held the weight of untold secrets, offered cryptic warnings and evasive answers. Their words, delivered in hushed whispers, were laced with an ancient dread that chilled Elias to the marrow. They spoke of a coven, not in the romanticized terms of modern paganism, but in the chilling language of fear, a malevolent force that had plagued their community for centuries. That night, the whispers started. Faint at first, then growing stronger, they seemed to emanate from the walls of the dilapidated cabin he'd rented on the edge of town. They were not human voices, but a discordant chorus of sibilant sounds, a symphony of dread that played upon his subconscious, weaving unsettling dreams of shadowy figures and ancient rituals. He woke bathed in cold sweat, the crucifix clutched tightly in his hand, its familiar weight offering a small comfort in the oppressive darkness. The following days unfolded in a similar vein. Elias spent hours poring over the journal, meticulously deciphering its faded script. He cross-referenced the details with local folklore, piecing together a disturbing picture of a coven whose practices had spanned generations, each ritual adding another layer to the curse that clung to Hollow Creek like a shroud. He learned of sacrifices made under the blood moon, of incantations whispered in the dead of night, and of a pact made with entities far older than the community itself. His research led him to a series of hidden symbols carved into the weathered stones of the creek bed, symbols that echoed the patterns found within the journal. These symbols weren't simply decorative, they were potent, woven into the very fabric of the land, reinforcing the curse's grip on Hollow Creek. As he delved deeper, the strange occurrences intensified. Objects moved inexplicably, doors creaked open and shut on their own, and the whispers grew louder, morphing into guttural murmurs that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Sleep offered no respite, his dreams becoming nightmarish visions of grotesque rituals and shadowy figures that danced on the edge of his consciousness. He felt a constant, prickling awareness that he was being watched, that unseen eyes followed his every move. The climax of his investigation led him to a reclusive elder, a woman named Ilara, who lived in a secluded cabin deep within the woods. She was the last surviving member of the coven, a woman whose age defied explanation, her eyes holding the cold fire of centuries of secrets. Ilara confirmed the curse, her voice a chilling whisper that seemed to carry the weight of the ages. But she offered no remorse, no repentance. Instead, she spoke of a greater purpose, a balance of power that required the curse's continued existence. She revealed a chilling truth: the curse wasn't just a random act of malevolence, it was a carefully constructed mechanism, a safeguard against something far more ancient and terrifying that lurked beneath the surface of Hollow Creek. Elias, armed with his research and his unwavering determination, attempted to break the curse. He employed techniques he gleaned from his studies, drawing upon forgotten rituals and ancient lore. But his attempt backfired, unleashing a torrent of malevolent energy that crashed upon him like a tidal wave. He felt the full force of the curse, its icy grip tightening around his soul, threatening to consume him completely. His fight to survive, his quest to uncover the truth, had just become a desperate race against the encroaching darkness, a desperate struggle for survival against an ancient, malevolent entity that had chosen him as its latest victim. The whispers now filled his ears constantly, and the shadowy figures were no longer just dreams, but a terrifying reality as he faced the horrifying repercussions of his actions in the heart of Hollow Creek. The air hung thick and heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth as Elias navigated the dilapidated streets of Hollow Creek. The houses, hunched and weathered, seemed to lean in on themselves, whispering secrets to the wind. Sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced across the uneven ground, their movements unsettlingly fluid. A profound silence permeated the town, a silence broken only by the occasional creak of a rusty hinge or the distant, mournful cry of a bird. It was a silence that felt oppressive, heavy with unspoken fears and ancient sorrows. His attempts at conversation were met with stony stares and averted gazes. The residents, mostly elderly women whose faces bore the etched map of time and hardship, seemed to carry within them a burden of knowledge far heavier than their years would suggest. Their reticence wasn't merely politeness, it was a deep-seated fear, a guardedness born of centuries of experience with the unseen. They spoke in hushed whispers, their words evasive, laced with a caution that bordered on terror. Old Mrs. Gable, her eyes like chips of obsidian, offered only a chilling, "Best you leave, son. Some things are better left undisturbed." Her words, laced with a knowingness that sent a shiver down Elias's spine, carried the weight of generations of whispered warnings. Another woman, her face obscured by a faded shawl, simply pointed a trembling finger towards the woods and muttered about things that go bump in the night, before retreating hastily into her ramshackle home. Even the children, their faces pale and drawn, seemed to possess an awareness that belied their young age. They watched him from behind grimy windows, their eyes reflecting the same unsettling light that flickered in the depths of the ancient forest. Elias found solace only in his research, poring over the journal's cryptic entries, cross-referencing them with the scant information he could glean from the taciturn residents. The journal spoke of a coven, not of merry witches brewing potions under a full moon, but of a malevolent entity, whose power seemed interwoven with the very fabric of Hollow Creek. It detailed rituals steeped in darkness, sacrifices offered under the cold gaze of a blood moon, and incantations whispered in a language as ancient as the mountains themselves. The nights were the worst. The whispers, faint at first, grew in intensity, swirling around him like a chilling wind. They were not the sounds of human voices, but a discordant symphony of hisses and murmurs, a cacophony that seeped into his bones, twisting his dreams into grotesque visions of shadowy figures performing ancient, unholy rituals. He dreamt of twisted trees reaching up like gnarled fingers, and of faces leering from behind the gnarled branches, their eyes burning with an infernal light. He woke in cold sweat, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird, the crucifix clutched tightly in his hand, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. His days were marked by a growing sense of unease. Objects shifted inexplicably, books fell from shelves, doors creaked open and shut without a breath of wind, and a pervasive chill settled upon his skin, regardless of the temperature. He felt an incessant prickling sensation, as if he were constantly under surveillance, watched by unseen eyes that pierced the darkness. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, taking on monstrous shapes that danced just beyond the periphery of his vision. He discovered a series of symbols carved into the weathered stones of the creek bed, symbols that mirrored those found in the journal's marginalia. These weren't mere decorations, they pulsed with a sinister energy, as if they were conduits for a malevolent power, drawing strength from the land itself. The longer he remained in Hollow Creek, the more palpable the curse became, its suffocating presence weighing heavily upon him. One evening, while exploring the outskirts of town, Elias stumbled upon a crumbling stone structure hidden amidst the dense undergrowth. It was a small, forgotten graveyard, its headstones weathered and obscured by moss and creeping vines. Many bore no names, only unsettling symbols that mirrored those he'd seen in the creek bed. As he traced his fingers along the cold, damp stone of one particularly worn headstone, he felt a jolt of energy, a sharp, searing pain that shot up his arm. He staggered back, his breath catching in his throat, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He sensed an ancient power emanating from the stones, a palpable energy that threatened to overwhelm him. That night, the whispers intensified. They were no longer faint murmurs, but a guttural chorus of voices that seemed to emanate from every corner of the cabin, from the walls, the floorboards, even the very air he breathed. The shadowy figures in his dreams grew bolder, more menacing. They were no longer indistinct shapes, but grotesque entities with hollow eyes and elongated limbs, their movements unnervingly fluid and graceful. He began to see them at the edges of his vision, fleeting glimpses of twisted forms that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. He spent his nights huddled in his bed, the crucifix clutched in his hand, a prisoner in his own mind, haunted by the whispers and the spectral figures that stalked the shadows. He tried to pray, but even the words of comfort felt empty, his pleas lost in the chilling symphony of dread that surrounded him. His grip on sanity seemed to weaken with each passing hour, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until they merged into a single, horrifying tapestry. The curse had taken root, its tendrils wrapping around his soul, and Elias Thorne found himself trapped in the heart of a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. He wasn't just studying a curse, he was becoming a part of it. And the whispers promised more horrors to come. The very earth beneath his feet seemed to tremble with a malevolent energy, a foreboding that hinted at something far older and far more terrible lurking beneath the surface of Hollow Creek. The weight of centuries of suffering and dread pressed down upon him, threatening to crush his very spirit. His journey had transformed from a historical investigation into a desperate fight for survival, a battle against an ancient evil that had chosen him as its latest pawn. And as the darkness tightened its grip, he knew that his fight for survival had only just begun. The journal, brittle with age, yielded its secrets grudgingly. Elias, fueled by a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, spent countless hours deciphering its archaic script, its pages filled with spidery handwriting and unsettling illustrations. The text spoke of a coven, not the whimsical gatherings of folklore, but a brotherhood of shadows, their faces obscured in the gloom of their rituals. They weren't merely practitioners of dark arts, they were conduits, channels for an ancient, malevolent entity whose power seeped into the very soil of Hollow Creek. The chronicle detailed a ritual, a gruesome ceremony performed under the crimson gaze of a blood moon. It involved a sacrifice, not simply an animal offering, but a human, chosen for their unique bloodline, a lineage tainted by generations of dark dealings with the supernatural. The journal spoke of a specific family, the Blackwood line, whose descendants were considered vessels, living conduits through which the entity could exert its power. The sacrifice wasn't a mere killing, it was a ritualistic draining, a harrowing process that involved chants, incantations in a language Elias couldn't comprehend, and the use of peculiar symbols, identical to those he'd found etched into the stones of the creek bed. The symbols, according to the journal, were not mere markings but potent glyphs, each imbued with a dark power, designed to amplify the ritual's effect. They acted as anchors, tethering the entity to the physical realm, allowing it to exert its influence on the living. Elias traced the intricate designs with a trembling finger, feeling a strange prickling sensation, a cold dread that spread through his veins like icy tendrils. He felt a faint hum resonating from the paper, a low thrumming that vibrated in his bones. The journal's descriptions of the ritual were chillingly graphic, recounting in gruesome detail the acts performed under the blood moon's malevolent gaze. The journal's author, a former member of the coven who had sought redemption, documented the ritual's steps with chilling precision. He spoke of a circle of stones, aligned with specific celestial bodies, a sacred space where the entity's power could be harnessed. Within this circle, the sacrifice was bound, their life force slowly drawn out through arcane methods, their blood offered as a libation to the ancient being. The process, according to the journal, was excruciatingly painful, a slow, agonizing descent into darkness. The victims' screams were drowned out by the chanting of the coven members, their voices echoing through the night, a haunting symphony of despair. Beyond the horrific details of the sacrifice itself, the journal spoke of the coven's methods of maintaining their power. They fed the entity, not just through human sacrifice, but through fear, despair, and the suffering of the inhabitants of Hollow Creek. The town itself seemed to be a living sacrifice, its inhabitants unknowingly trapped in a cycle of fear and dread. Their lives were drained of joy and hope, their energy siphoned to sustain the entity's power. This explained the oppressive silence, the perpetual gloom, the pervasive fear that hung heavy in the air. The people were not merely afraid, they were bound, their spirits shackled to the entity's will. The journal also revealed the reason for the coven's secrecy and the villagers' eerie silence. They were not merely fearful, they were bound by a dark pact, their lives intertwined with the entity's survival. To betray the coven was to invite its wrath, a wrath far more terrible than anything Elias had previously imagined. The ritual was not only a sacrifice, it was a renewal, a reaffirmation of the pact, a binding of the entity to the town and its inhabitants. Breaking the cycle, the journal suggested, was impossible without a considerable sacrifice, a sacrifice potentially greater than the loss of an individual. It hinted at a counter-ritual, a complex and dangerous procedure that would require immense knowledge and courage. Elias found himself trapped in a macabre puzzle, piecing together fragmented clues from the journal, the cryptic symbols, and the whispers of the villagers. The puzzle was terrifyingly intricate, its pieces fitting together to reveal a horrifying picture of a town tethered to an ancient evil. He understood now why the town residents were so reticent. Their silence wasn't just fear, it was a desperate attempt to maintain the fragile balance, to prevent the entity from unleashing its full power upon them. The very air thrummed with a sinister energy, a palpable presence that was both repulsive and fascinating. He revisited the graveyard, the cold stone pressing against his skin. He focused on the symbols, tracing their lines with his fingers, feeling the faint hum of power beneath the surface. He found a pattern, a sequence that mirrored passages within the journal. The sequence, he realized, was a key, a code that could unlock further secrets. With renewed determination, he focused on deciphering the symbols, their significance far beyond mere decoration. These weren't simply markings, they were a language, a dark dialect of power, whispering of rituals and sacrifices, of a covenant with the abyss. He spent days, consumed by his research, poring over historical texts, arcane grimoires, and forgotten legends. He discovered references to similar rituals in ancient cultures, their descriptions echoing the horrors documented in the journal. The entity was not unique to Hollow Creek, its roots lay deep within the earth, its tentacles reaching across centuries and continents. It was a force as ancient as humanity itself, a darkness that had survived countless ages, feeding on fear and despair. The deeper Elias delved into his research, the more he realized the true extent of the curse. It wasn't merely a localized phenomenon, but a manifestation of something far larger, something far more ancient and insidious. He began to understand the true nature of the pact, the intricate web of power that bound the coven, the villagers, and the entity itself. He was walking a tightrope between knowledge and madness, his own sanity wavering under the weight of his discoveries. Each new piece of the puzzle brought him closer to the truth, but it also brought him closer to the brink of utter despair. The weight of the knowledge he had accumulated was almost unbearable, a burden far greater than he could have ever imagined. He realized that understanding the ritual wasn't enough. He had to find a way to break it, to sever the connection between Hollow Creek and the entity that held it captive. But how could one possibly challenge a force that had existed for centuries, a power interwoven with the very fabric of the town itself? He knew that the path ahead was perilous, fraught with danger, and the very real possibility of death. But he was already too far in to turn back. The whispers that haunted him were no longer merely ominous murmurs, but a chorus of voices urging him forward, pushing him into the heart of the darkness he so desperately sought to understand and ultimately defeat. He felt a terrible power thrumming within him, as if the ancient entity itself were calling to him. The fight for Hollow Creek's salvation was far from over, and Elias knew it was only just beginning. He was not merely a historian anymore, but a warrior, fighting an ancient evil at the edge of sanity. His destiny, it seemed, was inextricably bound to the fate of Hollow Creek. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, and the whispers intensified, promising a confrontation that would test his courage and his sanity to their very limits. The old woman sat hunched in a rocking chair, a silhouette against the gloom of her cabin. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows, illuminating a face etched with the map of a long, hard life. Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a spark, a chilling, knowing glint that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. He had found her name in the journal, tucked away in a cryptic passage detailing the coven's hierarchy, Agnes Blackwood, the last of the line. He'd arrived at her doorstep under the cloak of a starless night, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. He'd presented himself as a historian, a researcher interested in the town's peculiar history, a guise he'd meticulously crafted over weeks of agonizing self-doubt. He'd carefully chosen his words, his tone measured and respectful, but beneath the surface, a cold dread gnawed at his composure. He knew he was venturing into dangerous territory, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Agnes didn't speak for a long time, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond him. The only sound was the rhythmic creak of her rocking chair, a hypnotic counterpoint to the unsettling silence of the cabin. He felt a pressure building in the air, a palpable sense of anticipation that hung heavy, thick as the dust clinging to the ancient furniture. He wondered if she sensed his purpose, if she knew he carried the weight of the journal's secrets, the horrifying truth about Hollow Creek. Finally, she spoke, her voice a raspy whisper that seemed to emanate from the shadows themselves. You seek knowledge, young man. Knowledge is a dangerous thing, a double-edged sword that can wound as easily as it heals. Her words hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken warnings. Elias swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He couldn't deny his purpose any longer. He produced the journal, its brittle pages whispering tales of ancient evil. He laid it on the worn wooden table between them, the dim light reflecting off the worn leather cover. He watched as Agnes's eyes, ancient and knowing, settled on the journal, her gaze piercing and intense. She didn't touch it, didn't need to. The knowledge within its pages was already etched upon her soul. You know, Elias began, his voice trembling slightly, about the ritual. Agnes chuckled, a dry, rasping sound devoid of humor. The ritual. A word so small to describe such a vast, ancient power. He pressed on, recounting the details he'd gleaned from the journal, the blood moan, the sacrifices, the symbols, the ancient entity whose hunger fueled the town's despair. He detailed the Coven's methods, their chillingly efficient way of maintaining control, of sustaining the dark pact that bound Hollow Creek to its infernal master. As he spoke, Agnes's eyes never left his, a mixture of weariness and something akin to chilling acceptance clouding their depths. When he finished, a silence descended, heavier than before. The only sound was the relentless creak of Agnes's rocking chair, a metronome marking the passage of time in a place where time itself seemed distorted. He waited, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The anticipation was excruciating, the silence pregnant with unspoken truths. The journal speaks truth, Agnes finally conceded, her voice barely a breath. But only a fragment of it. It speaks of the mechanics, the means, but not the why. Elias leaned forward, his own fear overshadowed by a burgeoning curiosity. Why, Agnes? Why this ritual? Why the sacrifice? Agnes sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The entity, it is not simply evil, young man. It is ancient. Older than your history books, older than your understanding. It is a force that predates civilization, a power that has shaped the world in ways you cannot comprehend. Elias felt a cold wave wash over him. But the suffering, the fear, the lives destroyed. Agnes looked away, her gaze drifting to the dark corner of the cabin. The entity feeds on negative energy, young man. Fear, despair, suffering, these are its sustenance. But it also provides. It offers power, a connection to something greater. Greater? Elias repeated, incredulous. Greater than life itself? The entity demands a price, yes. But it also grants gifts. Protection, prosperity, a sense of belonging. Hollow Creek has flourished for centuries under its protection. The ritual isn't just a feeding, it's a contract, a pact of balance. To break it would be to invite chaos, destruction, a fate far worse than the current state of things. Elias felt a surge of anger. Protection? You call this protection? This town is a prison, its inhabitants bound by fear, their lives drained of joy and hope. Agnes's eyes hardened. You see only the darkness, young man. You fail to see the intricate tapestry, the delicate balance that has kept this town alive for centuries. The ritual is not merely a sacrifice, it's a necessary evil. To disrupt it is to invite a darkness far greater, a cataclysm that would swallow Hollow Creek whole. But there has to be another way, Elias insisted, desperate to find a path out of this horrifying situation. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve human sacrifice. Agnes shook her head, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. There is no other way, young man. The entity is ancient, its power far beyond your comprehension. To challenge it would be suicide. The Blackwood Line has served as its vessel for centuries. We've made our pact. We've accepted our fate. The weight of her words settled upon Elias like a shroud. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he faced a choice, accept the horrific status quo or risk unleashing an unimaginable horror upon Hollow Creek in a desperate attempt to break the curse. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, its crimson glow casting long, menacing shadows across the cabin. The confrontation had ended, not with a solution, but with a terrifying understanding of the depths of the darkness that had settled upon Hollow Creek and the impossible choices it presented. The whispers in the night intensified, promising a struggle of epic proportions, a battle against an ancient evil that was intertwined with the very fabric of the town's existence. The fight was far from over, and Elias felt the cold grip of fear, mixed with a desperate determination that would not allow him to succumb to despair. The fate of Hollow Creek rested upon his shoulders, a burden that threatened to crush him under its immense weight. The weight of Agnes's words hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of despair. Elias, despite the chilling revelation, refused to accept defeat. He had come too far, risked too much, to simply surrender to the ancient evil that had choked the life from Hollow Creek. He spent the next few days immersed in the journal, poring over its cryptic passages, searching for a weakness, a flaw in the ritual, a chink in the entity's seemingly impenetrable armor. He meticulously copied diagrams of the ritualistic symbols, studying their intricate designs, their unsettling geometry, searching for a hidden meaning, a key to unlocking the curse's grip. The journal spoke of ancient languages, of forgotten rites, of a power that defied comprehension. He discovered mentions of counter-rituals, whispered remedies, desperate attempts by previous generations to break free from the entity's thrall. These fragmented accounts were frustratingly incomplete, often ending abruptly, hinting at failures, at the horrifying consequences of defying the ancient pact. Yet, amid the despair, a flicker of hope ignited within him. One passage, tucked away in a decaying section of the journal, described a potential countermeasure, a ritual of banishment, a dangerous undertaking that required immense power and precise execution. It mentioned a specific herb, the nightshade bloom, said to possess potent magical properties, capable of disrupting the entity's connection to the mortal realm. The nightshade bloom, according to the journal, only bloomed under the light of a specific constellation, visible only once every 100 years. Elias's heart sank. The last recorded sighting of this constellation was centuries ago, rendering the counter-ritual seemingly impossible. However, a cryptic note at the bottom of the page suggested a way to artificially replicate the necessary celestial alignment using a combination of rare crystals and precisely crafted mirrors, focusing and amplifying the moonlight in a specific pattern. The task seemed almost impossible, a Herculean effort requiring extensive knowledge of both astronomy and arcane rituals. Driven by a desperate hope, Elias embarked on this perilous quest. He scoured antique shops and dusty libraries, seeking the necessary crystals, each one mentioned in the journal's obscure passages. He learned to harness the power of the full moon, studying its phases, its cycles, its subtle influence on the Earth's energy. He consulted ancient astronomical texts, deciphering star charts, and calculating the precise angles needed to replicate the constellation's alignment. Days blurred into weeks, his relentless pursuit fueled by an almost maniacal determination. He barely slept, fueled by coffee and an unwavering commitment to breaking the curse. He built the apparatus described in the journal, a complex arrangement of polished mirrors and rare crystals, each positioned with painstaking precision, its placement guided by the cryptic symbols from the journal. The air in his makeshift workshop thrummed with anticipation, a palpable energy that mirrored the turmoil in his own heart. He felt the weight of Hollow Creek upon him, the silent plea of its tormented inhabitants, a burden he carried with a heavy heart. He finally gathered the nightshade bloom, a rare and deadly herb, its petals a deep, unsettling purple. He handled it with caution, aware of its potent toxicity, a dangerous tool in his desperate battle against an ancient evil. The night of the ritual arrived, shrouded in a heavy, suffocating darkness. The air hung heavy with anticipation, a palpable sense of dread that echoed the fear gripping the town below. Elias, his face streaked with exhaustion, stood before his creation, the moonlight cascading through the mirrors, reflecting in the crystals, creating a mesmerizing display of shimmering light. He felt a surge of power, an unsettling force that hummed beneath his skin. He began the counter-ritual, chanting the ancient incantation, his voice barely audible above the wind's mournful howl. He poured his heart and soul into the invocation, a desperate plea to break the ancient pact. As he spoke the final words, a blinding flash of light erupted, a wave of immense power that rocked his very being. The air crackled with energy, the room vibrating with an almost unbearable intensity. A deafening roar echoed through the night, shaking the very foundations of the house. Elias, momentarily blinded, stumbled back, a burning sensation coursing through his veins. When his vision cleared, he saw a horrifying spectacle unfold. Instead of banishing the entity, the counter-ritual had unleashed its fury upon him. The air twisted and writhed, forming a swirling vortex of darkness, from which emerged a spectral form, a grotesque parody of the entity described in the journal. It was larger than he'd imagined, a monstrous shape of shadow and flame, its eyes burning with an infernal light. The entity reached out, its shadowy hand grasping for him, its touch promising unimaginable pain. Elias felt an overwhelming wave of terror, a paralyzing fear that threatened to consume him. He had failed. He attempted to flee, but the entity's power held him captive, its dark energy sucking the life from him, draining his strength, his will, his very soul. He felt himself weakening, his body racked with pain, his mind assaulted by visions of unspeakable horrors, glimpses of a future where Hollow Creek was swallowed by a darkness far more profound than he had ever imagined. His body felt as though it was being consumed from the inside, his bones twisting and breaking under the influence of the entity's demonic power. He screamed, a silent, desperate cry lost in the wind's howl. The entity's power overwhelmed him, binding him to its will, corrupting his soul, twisting his very essence. He felt the darkness seeping into his being, a relentless invasion, a horrifying metamorphosis. The transformation was excruciating, each moment more agonizing than the last as his body contorted and his mind was warped. He watched in horror as he changed into something monstrous, his form becoming twisted and corrupted, mirroring the very evil he sought to destroy. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, its crimson light reflecting in his distorted eyes, reflecting a reality more nightmarish than his wildest dreams. He was no longer Elias, the historian, but a vessel, a conduit for the entity's malevolent power, a horrific pawn in an ancient, terrifying game. His desperate attempt to break the curse had instead amplified it, unleashing a force beyond his comprehension. The entity's laughter reverberated through the night, a sound both chilling and triumphant, the sound of victory over a man who had dared to challenge its dominion over Hollow Creek. His fate was sealed, the curse's grip had tightened, its icy tendrils sinking deeper into his soul, and the town's fate, now inextricably intertwined with his own, remained uncertain, a precarious balance teetering on the brink of oblivion. He was now a prisoner of the darkness, trapped within his own horrifying transformation, a grim testament to the terrible consequences of challenging ancient evils. The curse had won, at least for now. But the fight, the desperate struggle for survival, was far from over. Story 3, The Witch's Mirror. The chilling events in Hollow Creek had left a profound impact on Amelia, Elias's niece. She'd inherited her grandmother's house, a rambling Victorian structure filled with dusty antiques and the lingering scent of lavender and something else, something unsettlingly acrid. Amongst the clutter, she discovered a tarnished silver mirror, its frame intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in her peripheral vision. It was a beautiful piece, undeniably captivating, but there was a coldness emanating from it, a palpable chill that seeped into her bones. Amelia initially dismissed it as a quirk of the old house, a product of her overactive imagination fueled by the tragic events surrounding her uncle's fate. The house itself felt different now, heavier, as if burdened by some unseen weight. Sleep became elusive, replaced by vivid, unsettling dreams, swirling mists, distorted faces, and a constant feeling of being watched. She would wake with a gasp, her heart pounding, the image of the mirror seared into her mind, its surface reflecting a darkness she couldn't comprehend. One evening, while cleaning the mirror, Amelia noticed a faint inscription etched into the back, barely visible under layers of tarnish. With painstaking effort, she cleaned the inscription, revealing a sequence of archaic symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. As she traced the symbols with her fingertip, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and the room around her seemed to distort, the familiar furniture morphing into grotesque shapes. The visions began in earnest then. Initially fleeting glimpses, a woman in a long, dark gown, her face obscured by shadow, performing strange rituals under a blood-red moon, a cacophony of whispers, unintelligible yet chilling. flashes of intense pain, accompanied by a guttural scream that echoed in her mind. The visions intensified, growing longer, more vivid, more terrifying. She found herself transported to a different time, a different place, watching scenes unfold as if she were a silent observer in a macabre play. She saw the witch, Elara, beautiful and cruel, commanding power beyond comprehension, her laughter echoing through centuries. Elara, according to the visions, was no ordinary sorceress. Her power stemmed from a pact with an ancient entity, a being of unimaginable darkness whose influence spread across generations. The mirror itself served as a conduit, a gateway between the mortal realm and the entity's horrifying realm of shadows. Amelia learned, through these nightmarish glimpses, of Elara's reign of terror, of her sacrifices, her dark rituals, and the terrible price she paid for her unholy ambition. Amelia tried to shake off the visions, to dismiss them as mere hallucinations, but the unsettling reality was inescapable. The mirror seemed to amplify her anxieties, her fears, her deepest insecurities, twisting them into terrifying manifestations. Every reflection held a hint of something unnatural, something sinister lurking just beyond the glass. Her reflection would morph, her face twisting into grotesque parodies, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. The house seemed to grow colder, the silence punctuated by whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Her days were haunted by the constant fear of the next vision, the next intrusion from the other side. Sleep offered no respite. Instead, it plunged her deeper into Elara's twisted world. She started losing track of time, the line blurring between reality and the haunting visions. The mirror, once merely a curious antique, had become her tormentor, a portal to a world of nightmare. Desperate, Amelia sought help. She consulted historians, paranormal investigators, even a renowned occultist, but none could offer a solution, only confirmation of the mirror's malevolent nature. The symbols on the back of the mirror, they discovered, were a language lost to time, a code spoken by ancient covens, a tongue that even the most seasoned scholars found difficult to decipher. The mirror wasn't just an object, it was a key, an unlocked door to a terrifying dimension. One particularly harrowing vision revealed the final act of Elara's dark ritual, the sacrifice she made to bind her soul to the entity, forever linking her to its malevolent power. Elara's spectral form appeared before Amelia, trapped within the mirror's confines, her eyes filled with an unending despair. She could not escape her cursed eternity. But there was another element, a thread of hope woven into Elara's torment. Elara's voice, faint yet clear, echoed within Amelia's mind. "Break the pact, destroy the mirror, it's the only way." She whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The entity feeds on the fear sustains it, destroy the mirror, and you destroy its power." Amelia, armed with this new knowledge, understood the terrifying implications of the mirror's power and Elara's desperate plea. The mirror was not just a portal, it was a battery, absorbing fear, channeling it to the entity, sustaining its existence. Destroying the mirror wouldn't just banish Elara, it would sever the entity's connection to the mortal realm, ending its reign of terror once and for all. The task, however, proved daunting. The mirror was incredibly resilient, its ancient enchantment making it impervious to conventional methods of destruction. Amelia tried everything. She tried to shatter it, burn it, even bury it under consecrated ground. But nothing worked. The mirror remained, a constant threat, its chilling presence a daily reminder of the dark power it harbored. Driven by desperation, Amelia returned to her uncle's research, hoping to find a clue, a method, a weapon capable of destroying the cursed mirror. Elias's notes hinted at a way to disrupt the entity's power, a hidden weakness within the ancient pact, a counter-ritual utilizing a specific type of rare crystal and a precisely formulated incantation. The details were vague, fragmented, but they offered a glimmer of hope. Amelia began a desperate race against time, determined to fulfill Elara's final request, to break the pact and free the tormented soul trapped within the mirror's reflection. The weight of Hollow Creek's past, her uncle's sacrifice, and Elara's desperate plea rested upon her shoulders. Her success or failure would determine the fate of many, and her own. The final confrontation with the entity and the mirror lay ahead. The air crackled with anticipation. The struggle to break the ancient curse was far from over. The visions intensified, becoming less like fleeting glimpses and more like fully immersive experiences. Amelia found herself not merely observing Elara's life, but feeling it, experiencing the chilling reality of her actions as if they were her own. One moment she was a young Elara, innocent and filled with a naive yearning for power. The next she was witnessing the gruesome ritualistic sacrifices, feeling the sting of the blade, the icy grip of fear in the moments before her victims breathed their last. The air in the room would grow cold, the scent of wood smoke and something acrid, like burnt flesh, would fill her nostrils, even though the room remained unchanged. The smells were visceral, making the visions almost unbearable. She witnessed Elara's pact with the entity, a terrifying being whose form shifted and changed with every viewing, sometimes a shapeless mass of darkness, other times a grotesque humanoid figure with eyes that burned with malevolent light. The pact wasn't a formal ceremony, it was a gradual, insidious corruption, a slow surrender to the entity's power in exchange for forbidden knowledge and unimaginable abilities. Amelia felt the insidious creep of the entity's influence, the subtle erosion of Elara's humanity, replaced by an insatiable hunger for power and a chilling detachment from morality. Elara's victims weren't just random people. Amelia saw connections to her own family history, a chilling revelation that sent a wave of dread through her. Faces she'd seen in old family photographs, names whispered in hushed tones during family gatherings, they were all victims of Elara's dark magic. The horrifying truth was slowly unveiled. Her own family was cursed, entangled in Elara's dark legacy. A chilling realization dawned on her. The mirror wasn't just a random cursed object, it was a generational curse, passed down through her family, a horrifying inheritance. Driven by the urgency of these visions, Amelia immersed herself in her family history. She spent weeks poring over dusty genealogical records, tracing her lineage back centuries, uncovering a tapestry of secrets and hidden tragedies. She found stories of unexplained deaths, strange illnesses, and a recurring motif of mirrors, old, ornate mirrors that seemed to hold a power beyond their physical form. She discovered accounts of strange rituals performed by her ancestors, clandestine gatherings under the cover of darkness, cryptic symbols etched into forgotten family heirlooms. The deeper she delved, the clearer the connection between her family and Elara became. Her ancestors, seemingly ordinary people living ordinary lives, were unknowingly pawns in Elara's wicked game, their destinies intertwined with the witch's dark legacy. She discovered that the mirror had been passed down through her family for generations, each inheritor unknowingly becoming a vessel for the entity's malevolent influence. The mirror was more than just a portal, it was a conduit, a focus point for Elara's lingering power, a cursed object that had poisoned her lineage for centuries. One particularly vivid vision showed a chilling scene where a direct ancestor, a woman named Isolde, had unwittingly performed a ritual using the mirror, a ritual meant to protect her family, but which unknowingly strengthened Elara's hold on them. Isolde, beautiful and strong, was shown performing a ritual meant to ward off misfortune, only to accidentally bind the family's fate further to Elara's malevolent curse. The ritual was a twisted perversion of protective magic, a tragic misinterpretation of an ancient charm, unwittingly strengthening the entity's power, sealing their family's tragic fate. The visions revealed a cycle of fear and despair passed through generations, each ancestor grappling with the mirror's influence, each attempting to break free from its grasp, only to unwittingly strengthen the entity's hold. The entity fed on fear, and the mirror was a powerful amplifier of the family's anxieties, their insecurities, their deepest fears. This feedback loop ensured the entity's continued existence, its malevolent influence growing stronger with every generation. The weight of this revelation pressed heavily on Amelia. She was not just dealing with a haunted object, she was battling a generational curse, a centuries-old evil that had woven itself into the very fabric of her family's history. The mirror was not simply a gateway, it was a malignant parasite, feeding on the fears of her ancestors and now threatening to consume her as well. The understanding deepened the urgency of her task. Destroying the mirror wasn't just about saving herself, it was about breaking the cycle of fear, freeing her family from Elara's curse, and severing the entity's connection to the mortal realm. The visions, though terrifying, also provided crucial insights. Elara's whispers, initially unintelligible, started to become clearer, providing fragmented clues on the mirror's origins, its enchantment, and the way to destroy it. These pieces of information, combined with her family history research, pointed to a hidden weakness in Alara's pact, a vulnerability the entity had overlooked centuries ago. The answer, Alara's voice implied, lay in a specific type of rare crystal, a crystal only found in the remote mountains far away, combined with a counter-ritual utilizing a specific incantation, a lost dialect of an ancient language. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Amelia felt a surge of determination. The task ahead was daunting, fraught with peril, but she was no longer just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her family, for her ancestors, for generations of those who had suffered under Alara's curse. The visions were tormenting, but they were also a guide, a pathway leading her toward the solution. The mirror remained a chilling presence, but now it was more than just a source of fear, it was a challenge, a puzzle she was determined to solve, a battle she was determined to win. The journey to confront the ancient entity was fraught with uncertainty, but Amelia was prepared for anything, for she was armed with the knowledge of the past and the hope for the future. The final confrontation loomed, a showdown between her will and the centuries of dark magic bound within the cursed mirror's reflective surface. The fate of her family, and perhaps the world, rested on her shoulders. The visions continued, relentless and invasive, seeping into her waking hours like a noxious gas. Sleep offered no respite. Instead, it became a continuation of the torment, a descent into a waking nightmare where the boundaries of reality dissolved. She found herself walking through the dimly lit halls of her ancestral home, the same house she inhabited, yet profoundly different. The walls seemed to breathe, the air thick with the scent of decay and the chilling whispers of forgotten voices. Familiar objects, a grandfather clock, a worn tapestry, a dusty antique book, transformed before her eyes, becoming grotesque parodies of their former selves, their surfaces writhing with unseen energies. Her reflection in the mirror, once a source of comfort, became a horrifying spectacle. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were now hollow, dark orbs reflecting the malevolent light of the entity. Her skin appeared gaunt and pallid, her hair streaked with unnatural gray. She was losing herself, fragmenting into pieces, each vision chipping away at her sanity, leaving behind only a fractured image of the woman she once was. The whispers, once faint and indistinct, grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the fabric of her thoughts, replacing her own voice with Alara's chilling pronouncements. Alara's voice was now a constant companion, a malevolent presence that taunted and manipulated her, twisting her perceptions, feeding on her growing fear. Simple tasks became monumental struggles. The act of drinking water felt like swallowing poison. The warmth of a fire brought not comfort but the searing sensation of being consumed by flames. The world itself seemed to conspire against her, each familiar sight, each familiar sound, tainted with an insidious malevolence that threatened to engulf her completely. Her days bled into nights, a relentless cycle of terror and disorientation. She found herself scavenging through old journals, deciphering cryptic entries written in faded ink, the words blurring into incomprehensible symbols, echoing the chaotic state of her mind. She'd spend hours poring over old family portraits, the faces of her ancestors morphing into Alara's haunting visage, their eyes accusing, their expressions filled with a silent, eternal anguish. The line between the visions and reality was completely obliterated. Was she truly in her own home, or was she trapped within the spectral realm of Alara's influence? Were the shadows in the corners of her eyes merely a trick of the light, or were they the manifestations of the entity's malevolent presence? She questioned the stability of her own perception, her senses becoming unreliable guides in this hallucinatory landscape. The world was a kaleidoscope of fragmented images and unsettling sounds, her own reality dissolving into the nightmarish spectacle Alara's curse had created. Even her closest friends and family became suspect, their faces shifting and changing, their voices echoing with Alara's insidious influence. Their words of comfort sounded like veiled threats, their concern laced with a chilling undercurrent of malevolence. Paranoia was her constant companion, a gnawing suspicion that everyone around her was a potential threat, a puppet dancing to Alara's tune. She began to hear Alara's laughter, a high-pitched, chilling sound that echoed through the empty rooms of her home. The laughter was infectious, weaving itself into her very being, a mockery of her growing despair. She saw Alara's spectral form in the periphery of her vision, a fleeting glimpse of a woman draped in shadows, her eyes burning with an unnatural light, her laughter a constant reminder of her encroaching doom. The mirror was no longer just an object, it was a living entity, feeding on her fear, amplifying her anguish, twisting her soul into a grotesque mockery of her former self. One evening, while examining a particularly old, leather-bound family journal, she found a hidden compartment. Inside, she discovered a collection of dried herbs, oddly arranged, accompanied by a small, tarnished silver amulet and a piece of parchment inscribed with symbols she couldn't decipher. Her mind, already fractured, attempted to interpret the cryptic symbols, her hands trembling as she traced their arcane shapes. The air grew heavy, the temperature plummeting. The scent of wood smoke and something akin to decaying flesh filled the air, a smell that clung to her, a chilling perfume of the otherworld. As she examined the amulet, she experienced a surge of vivid memories, not her own, but those of Isolde, her ancestor. She saw Isolde, a young woman with fiery red hair and emerald green eyes, standing before the mirror, her face etched with worry. Isolde wasn't performing a protective ritual, she was desperately trying to break the curse, to sever the connection between her family and the malevolent entity. The ritual, as Amelia now understood, was a desperate attempt to counter the dark magic, a counterspell she tragically misinterpreted, only to accidentally strengthen the entity's hold. The visions intensified, showing her Isolde's failure, her final moments, filled with despair and regret as the entity's icy grip tightened around her. The amulet, a failed attempt at protection, was now a chilling testament to Isolde's desperate fight. The herbs, carefully chosen and meticulously arranged, were supposed to create a protective barrier, but had only served to fuel the entity's dark power. The parchment, covered in a language lost to time, contained a partial counterspell, an incomplete incantation that Isolde had been unable to decipher before her death. Amelia felt a surge of empathy for her ancestor, a deep understanding of Isolde's struggle, her futile attempts to escape the clutches of Alara's curse. The weight of her family's history, of generations of suffering and despair, bore down on her. She felt the desperation of her ancestors, the echoing cries of those who had fallen victim to the entity's malevolent influence. She was not alone in this battle, she was part of a long line of warriors who had fought against this ancient evil, each one trying to break the cycle of fear and despair. But the visions also revealed a glimmer of hope. Within the chaotic jumble of images and whispers, Amelia perceived a subtle shift, a faint indication of a weakness within the entity's grip. It was a fleeting glimpse, a brief moment of clarity amidst the overwhelming darkness, yet it was enough to ignite a spark of hope in her heart. The entity, despite its immense power, was not invincible. There was a chink in its armor, a vulnerability she could exploit, a way to sever its connection to the mirror, to break the generational curse that had haunted her family for centuries. The fight wasn't over, it had just begun, and Amelia, armed with the knowledge of the past and the unwavering determination of her ancestors, was prepared to face the coming storm. The mirror, once a symbol of fear and despair, had become a challenge, a puzzle she was determined to solve. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but she was ready. The weight of centuries pressed down on Amelia, the chilling legacy of Alara's curse a palpable presence in the air. The amulet, cold against her skin, pulsed with a faint, unsettling energy. The dried herbs, brittle and crumbling in her hand, whispered secrets of forgotten rituals and desperate prayers. The parchment, its script a baffling enigma, felt strangely warm, as though imbued with a lingering magic. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't unravel the mystery alone. She needed help, a guide through the treacherous labyrinth of her family's past. Dr. Alastair Finch, a historian specializing in local folklore and the obscure annals of her region, was a man of science, a skeptic by nature, yet his eyes, when he listened to Amelia's harrowing tale, held a flicker of something akin to belief. He was a man of meticulous research, his office a testament to his dedication, lined with shelves overflowing with ancient texts, dusty manuscripts, and yellowed photographs. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration, as Amelia recounted her visions, her growing fear, her desperate need to understand the power that held her family captive. He didn't dismiss her story as mere delusion, or a product of a troubled mind. Instead, he listened, his skepticism tempered by a hesitant respect for the weight of her experiences. "The witch's mirror," he murmured, tracing a finger along the spine of a particularly ancient tome. "A local legend, shrouded in mystery and half-remembered tales. Few believe it to be anything more than folklore, but," he paused, his gaze meeting Amelia's, "your story adds a chilling layer of reality to the myth." He handed her a worn, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. This belonged to Silas Blackwood, a local historian who dedicated his life to understanding the legends of this region. He meticulously documented the stories surrounding the mirror, and his research might offer some insight. Silas Blackwood's journal was a treasure trove of information, weaving together fragments of local history, eyewitness accounts from witch trials dating back to the 17th century, and chilling anecdotes passed down through generations. The entries spoke of a mirror, not just as a reflective surface, but as a gateway, a conduit to a dark, malevolent force. The journal detailed the tragic fates of several families cursed by the mirror's influence, their lives consumed by the same terrors that plagued Amelia. Each account echoed with a haunting similarity, a recurring pattern of escalating visions, paranoia, and the insidious whispering voice of Alara. Blackwood's research also shed light on the history of the mirror itself. It wasn't an ordinary mirror, it was crafted with a specific ritual, its frame intricately carved with symbols that Blackwood believed to be connected to ancient pagan practices. He theorized that the mirror's power stemmed from a dark pact, a bargain struck with a malevolent entity, granting the mirror immense power at the cost of the souls of those who interacted with it. He described the mirror's ability to amplify negative emotions, feeding on fear, despair, and anguish, twisting those emotions into a potent source of dark energy. The journal also contained copies of ancient spells and incantations, attempts by past generations to sever the mirror's connection to Alara, to break the generational curse. Most of the spells were incomplete, fragmented, their effectiveness hampered by gaps in understanding, by missing ingredients or improperly performed rituals. However, Blackwood's notes suggested a possible method of weakening the mirror's power, a ritual that involved neutralizing the mirror's connection to Alara through a counterspell, using a combination of herbs, crystals, and a precise incantation. Amelia, armed with Blackwood's research, revisited the hidden compartment in her family journal. She examined the dried herbs, their properties described in detail within Blackwood's journal. She identified henbane, nightshade, and mandrake root, potent ingredients, each associated with potent, often dangerous, magical properties. The arrangement of the herbs, initially baffling, now made sense, revealing a rudimentary attempt to create a protective barrier. However, as Blackwood's research indicated, the herbs alone weren't sufficient to break Alara's curse, they merely served to amplify the mirror's influence. The tarnished silver amulet, identified by Blackwood as a charm meant to deflect negativity, was clearly ineffective, its protective properties overwhelmed by the mirror's power. The parchment, covered in cryptic symbols, was a partial counterspell, its incomplete incantation leaving the vital step for severing the curse unknown. Amelia meticulously copied the symbols, comparing them to similar symbols within Blackwood's journal. She spent days deciphering the ancient language, its archaic words and phrases echoing the eerie whispers that haunted her. She gradually pieced together the fragmented counterspell, supplementing the missing parts with information found in Blackwood's notes. With the help of Dr. Finch, she researched the locations Blackwood had marked in his journal. These were sites where rituals associated with the mirror had taken place. These locations, all situated near ancient burial grounds and natural ley lines, pulsed with an uncanny energy that sent shivers down her spine. The energy at these places, Amelia understood, fueled the mirror's power, the ley lines acting as conduits for Alara's influence. One site, a secluded grove of ancient oak trees, was identified as the place where the mirror had been initially crafted, a location of potent magical energy. This grove, Amelia surmised, was the keystone, the source of the mirror's malevolent energy. At the grove, Amelia, armed with the completed counterspell, carefully performed the ritual, guided by Blackwood's notes and her newfound knowledge. It was a dangerous undertaking, a delicate balance of magic and precision. The air crackled with energy, the atmosphere thick with tension as she spoke the ancient words, the rhythm of her voice echoing through the stillness of the grove. As she finished the incantation, a surge of energy rippled through the grove, shaking the ancient trees. The mirror, situated in her home, reacted, its surface rippling with unnatural light, its dark energy beginning to fade. The whispers of Alara faded, becoming nothing more than a distant echo. The vision ceased. The fear subsided, replaced by a profound sense of relief, a quiet victory against an ancient evil. The mirror, stripped of its malevolent power, reflected her image clearly, her eyes bright, her skin healthy, her face reflecting the calm that settled upon her. The curse was broken, the generational trauma severed, but the echoes of Alara's influence would linger, a reminder of her family's harrowing struggle against the dark power of the witch's mirror. The fight was won, but the memory served as a chilling reminder of the ancient power residing in seemingly mundane objects. The weight of history lifted, leaving a quiet peace. Amelia knew that the shadow of Alara would forever be a part of her family's story, but it would no longer hold them captive. The air in the old Blackwood Manor hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay, a fitting atmosphere for the confrontation that awaited Amelia. The mirror, now dimmed but still possessing an unsettling aura, stood in the center of the room, its surface reflecting a distorted, shimmering image of the grove where she'd performed the counterspell. A chill, deeper than the autumnal night outside, permeated the very walls, a tangible presence of Alara's lingering spirit. Then, she appeared. Not as a grotesque apparition, but as a wisp, a shimmering image barely visible at the edge of Amelia's vision, a spectral woman draped in the tattered remnants of a once elegant gown. Her eyes, pools of liquid darkness, held an ancient sorrow, a weariness born from centuries of malevolence. Her voice, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very shadows of the room, sent shivers down Amelia's spine. "You have dared to challenge me, child of Blackwood," Alara rasped, her voice echoing with the weight of centuries of grudges and unmet desires. "You have sought to break the pact, to sever the connection that bound your lineage to my power." Amelia, despite the tremor in her hands, held her gaze steady. She had spent weeks studying Blackwood's journal, immersing herself in the history of the mirror, understanding its true nature. She knew now that Alara wasn't simply a malevolent spirit, she was a victim, a woman wronged, her rage and despair twisted and amplified by a ritual that had bound her to the mirror. "I didn't seek to destroy you, Alara," Amelia responded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "I sought to break the cycle of suffering, to free my family from your grasp." Alara's spectral form flickered, the shimmering image almost dissolving into the shadows. "Suffering? You call this suffering? I have endured centuries of torment, trapped within this cursed object, feeding on the despair of your ancestors. They sought power, they craved knowledge beyond their comprehension, and I, in my desperation, granted their wishes." The story that unfolded was a chilling tale of ambition and folly, of a coven of witches who, in their quest for forbidden knowledge, had sought to harness the power of a ley line, a conduit of raw magical energy. Alara, the coven's leader, had brokered a deal with a being beyond human comprehension, a pact that gave them unimaginable power but at a terrible cost. The mirror was the physical manifestation of this pact, a gateway through which Alara's tormented soul was bound, forever feeding on the emotions of those who gazed upon its surface. The Blackwood family, Alara's voice dripped with bitter irony, they were not the first, nor would they be the last. Each generation, drawn by the allure of forbidden knowledge, fueled my power, ensuring my continued torment. Your ancestors, blind to the true nature of the pact, passed down the curse, generation after generation, each one believing they could control the mirror's power, unaware of its true nature. She paused, her gaze seeming to penetrate Amelia's soul. They were puppets, dancing on strings of their own making. Alara revealed the true nature of the counterspell, explaining how it didn't destroy her but merely weakened the link between her and the mirror, severing the direct connection that allowed her to influence the Blackwood line. It was a precarious balance, a delicate weakening of her power rather than a complete annihilation. The cost, she warned, was a part of her essence, a piece of her soul forever bound to the mirror, a silent testament to her centuries-long torment. The confrontation wasn't a battle of magic, but a battle of wills, a struggle against an ancient, wounded spirit. Amelia, armed with understanding and empathy, appealed to Alara's trapped essence, not to destroy, but to find a path to release, however tenuous. It was a negotiation at the edge of the abyss, where the line between life and death, between light and shadow, blurred into a chilling twilight. As Amelia uttered the final words of the modified counterspell, a wave of energy washed over the room, not violent or destructive, but cleansing, purifying. The mirror's surface grew calm, the shimmering reflection ceasing, revealing a clear, if somewhat tarnished, reflection of the room. Elara's spectral form wavered, her form becoming fainter, her voice a mere sigh, a wisp of sorrow fading into the shadows. The price, however, was heavier than Amelia anticipated. The ritual left her drained, exhausted, but not broken. She felt the lingering presence of Elara, a subdued echo, a faint whisper of sorrow echoing in the very fabric of the manor. It was a chilling reminder of the pact, a testament to the ancient power that had been contained, not destroyed. The curse was broken, the cycle of suffering severed, but the shadows of Elara's existence would forever linger, a testament to the dark legacy of the witch's mirror. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the manor, casting long shadows across the dust-covered floor. The air, though still carrying a faint scent of decay, was lighter, cleansed. Amelia stood before the mirror, its surface reflecting her image clearly, her eyes clear and resolute. She was exhausted, but a sense of peace settled upon her. The curse was lifted, the generations of trauma severed. She knew the memory of Elara, of the mirror, and of the harrowing struggle would forever remain a part of her family's story. But it would no longer hold them captive. The weight of history had been lifted, leaving behind a quiet peace, a quiet victory against an ancient evil. The echoes of Elara's tormented existence would linger, a haunting reminder of the potent magic bound within seemingly ordinary objects, and the importance of understanding the past before attempting to change the future. The fight was won, but the victory tasted bittersweet, tinged with the melancholy understanding of a past that can never be fully erased. The witch's mirror remained, a silent testament to a battle fought and won, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the living and the spectral, and the enduring power of ancient magic. Story 4, The Salem Legacy. The brittle pages of the journal, yellowed and fragile with age, whispered secrets only now revealed to Amelia. The spidery script, written in a hand that trembled with fear and desperation, spoke of a life shattered by unfounded accusations, a life consumed by the fervor of the Salem witch trials. It was the diary of her great-great-great-grandmother, Abigail, a woman whose name had been etched in the annals of history as a witch, her memory tarnished by the fires of religious zealotry and mass hysteria. Abigail's account began not with accusations, but with the vibrant tapestry of life in a small Puritan community, a community that, beneath its veneer of piety, concealed a cauldron of simmering resentments and unchecked power. She described a society rigidly structured, where suspicion lurked in every shadow, where whispers could condemn and glances could destroy. Abigail, a woman of independent spirit and unconventional wisdom, often relied on herbal remedies and folk medicine, practices that were quickly misinterpreted as witchcraft in the increasingly paranoid atmosphere. The journal detailed the creeping paranoia that had infiltrated Salem, transforming neighbors into accusers and friends into betrayers. Abigail described the chilling spectacle of the trials, the feverish accusations, the coerced confessions, and the chilling indifference of those in authority. She painted a vivid picture of a community gripped by fear, a community where reason and logic had surrendered to superstition and blind faith. Abigail's descriptions were not just of the spectacle of the trials, but of the agonizing details of her own imprisonment. She wrote of the cramped, cold cells, the constant fear, and the gnawing hunger that gnawed at her soul. She described the interrogations, the relentless pressure to confess to crimes she had never committed, the physical and psychological torment inflicted upon her and other accused women. She wrote of the pervasive stench of fear, of the chilling air of the courtroom, and of the palpable sense of impending doom that hung over the proceedings. She recorded the names of those who had turned against her, neighbors who, fueled by fear and self-preservation, had willingly offered false testimony, their words a deadly weapon wielded against her. There were also accounts of fleeting moments of kindness, small acts of compassion from those who dared to question the overwhelming tide of hysteria. These small acts of defiance, these whispers of doubt, stood as beacons of humanity against the encroaching darkness. However, the journal's most disturbing revelation lay not in its depiction of the trials themselves, but in what Abigail discovered during her imprisonment. Deep within the confines of the Salem jail, she uncovered a hidden network, a secret society that operated beneath the surface of the community. This group, hidden within plain sight, manipulated the trials, exploiting the mass hysteria to further their own agenda. They were not merely spectators of the events, they were puppeteers, pulling strings from the shadows, directing the narrative, and orchestrating the chaos. The journal hinted at a ritual, a dark ceremony performed under the cover of darkness, involving a specific artifact, an object of ancient and immense power. Abigail's writing became more fragmented, more cryptic, as if she feared the very act of recording these details would bring further danger. She spoke of symbols etched into the artifact, incantations whispered under the pale moonlight, and a power that transcended the human world. This hidden society, Abigail revealed, sought to exploit the chaos and fear of the trials to draw strength from the collective suffering, feeding off the negative energy generated by the accusations and executions. The artifact, the journal suggested, served as a conduit, amplifying this energy, transforming it into something dark and malevolent. Abigail's account implied that the trials weren't just about rooting out witchcraft, but were part of a larger, more sinister design, a plan to manipulate and control the community through the manipulation of fear and superstition. The journal concluded abruptly, the last entry unfinished, its words trailing off mid-sentence, hinting at a sudden and violent end. The final lines were smudged, as if hastily wiped clean, leaving behind only a chilling sense of urgency and unresolved mystery. The artifact, its purpose, and the fate of those involved in the secret society remained unanswered questions, hanging like a dark cloud over Amelia's discovery. Amelia, having pieced together Abigail's fragmented narrative, found herself confronting a legacy far more complex and sinister than she had ever imagined. The Salem witch trials weren't just a historical event, they were a catalyst, a dark ritual that had unleashed forces far beyond the comprehension of the community. The accusations, the trials, and the executions were not merely the result of religious zeal and mass hysteria, they were calculated actions, orchestrated to amplify dark magic, a macabre ritual conducted under the guise of religious piety. The journal's final, cryptic entries hinted at the artifact's connection to the Blackwood lineage, suggesting that her family's history was inextricably intertwined with this ancient evil. The mirror, she now realized, wasn't simply a cursed object, it was a focal point, a conduit for the energy unleashed during the Salem trials. It was a tangible link to the dark legacy of her ancestors, a legacy that threatened not only her family but the very fabric of reality itself. The whispers of the past were now echoing in her present, a chilling symphony of sorrow, fear, and ancient power. The echoes resonated not only within the walls of the Blackwood Manor but also within her very soul, a haunting reminder of the legacy she had inherited, a legacy she now felt compelled to confront. The weight of history pressed down on Amelia, the chilling realization that she was not merely a descendant of the accused but an inheritor of a curse that spanned centuries. The fight was far from over, and she knew that confronting the artifact, and the entity it channeled, would require more than courage. It would require understanding, empathy, and a deep understanding of the dark history that had shaped her family's destiny. The whispers from the past were not simply haunting echoes, they were a call to action, a summons to a battle that transcended time, a confrontation with a darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. The legacy of Salem, it seemed, was far from over. Abigail's meticulous script detailed the chilling mechanics of injustice, painting a portrait of a society teetering on the precipice of madness. The accusations weren't random outbursts, they were meticulously crafted, fueled by personal vendettas, simmering rivalries, and the insatiable hunger for power that festered beneath the surface of Puritan piety. Land disputes, petty arguments, and simple disagreements morphed into accusations of witchcraft, each whisper carrying the weight of eternal damnation. One entry described the plight of Goody Goodwife Putnam, a woman accused of cursing a neighbor's livestock. Abigail noted that the actual cause of the animal's illness was a rare fungal infection, easily treatable with common herbs. Yet, Goodwife Putnam's knowledge of herbal remedies, her quiet demeanor and self-reliance, had been twisted into evidence of her pact with the devil. Abigail witnessed the relentless interrogation, the relentless pressure to confess to a crime she hadn't committed, a scene repeated countless times throughout her confinement. The subtle coercion, the leading questions, the exhaustion-induced hallucinations, all meticulously documented, exposing the fragility of the legal process, its vulnerability to manipulation and outright fabrication. Another entry detailed the case of Sarah Good, a homeless woman, whose erratic behavior and impoverished circumstances were interpreted as clear signs of demonic possession. Abigail observed how Sarah's desperate pleas for mercy, her attempts to explain her actions, were dismissed as further proof of her guilt. The court, consumed by a collective hysteria, saw only what it wanted to see, ignoring the obvious signs of mental instability and poverty. Abigail noted the chilling irony. Sarah's poverty, her lack of social standing, made her an easy target, a convenient scapegoat for the community's anxieties and fears. The journal documented not only the trials themselves but also the chilling aftermath. Abigail described the brutal conditions in the prison, the lack of food and medical care, the constant fear of the next accusation, the ever-present feeling of betrayal. She described the psychological torment, the sleep deprivation, the relentless questioning designed to break the spirit of the accused and extract confessions. She painted a vivid picture of the emotional and physical toll the accusations took on the women, highlighting the erosion of their dignity, their faith, and their hope. The journal highlighted the hypocrisy of the accusers, the individuals who, while publicly condemning witchcraft, engaged in their own forms of wickedness and deceit. Abigail described Reverend Parris, the town's minister, and his intense desire for power and influence, how he manipulated the trials to consolidate his authority and silence his critics. His daughters, Abigail and Betty, were presented as devout young women, victims of satanic influence, yet Abigail witnessed their manipulative games, their calculated falsehoods, their willingness to exploit the community's fear for personal gain. The journal portrayed these young women not as innocent victims, but as key players in the unfolding drama, their accusations fueled by a cocktail of resentment, jealousy, and a thirst for power. Abigail described the chilling spectacle of the executions, the somber processions to Gallows Hill, the chilling silence of the crowd as the condemned women met their fate. She recounted the horrifying details, the screams, the prayers, the frantic attempts to cling to life, all etched into her memory, forever haunting her existence. She wrote not only about the physical horror but also about the spiritual desolation, the profound loss of faith and hope that swept through the community in the wake of each execution. These events were not mere legal proceedings, they were acts of ritualistic sacrifice, fueled by a deeply rooted belief in demonic power and the need to purge evil through violence. The journal went beyond individual accusations, detailing the broader societal factors that contributed to the hysteria. Abigail meticulously observed how rumors and gossip spread like wildfire, poisoning the atmosphere and poisoning relationships, leading to mistrust and paranoia. She described the role of social pressure, the fear of being ostracized or accused oneself, leading to a culture of silence and complicity. Individuals who harbored doubts were silenced, afraid to speak out against the prevailing narrative, afraid of becoming the next target. She detailed the role of the court itself, a system that seemed designed to convict rather than to dispense justice. The court's procedures were flawed, lacking due process, riddled with bias, and driven by religious extremism. Evidence was disregarded, testimonies were coerced, and confessions were extracted through torture and psychological manipulation. The journal showcased the chilling ease with which innocent people could be condemned, their lives forfeit to a system incapable of recognizing or acknowledging injustice. The lack of legal representation for the accused, the absence of impartial judges, the reliance on spectral evidence, all factors that contributed to the miscarriage of justice on a colossal scale. Abigail's writings also revealed the subtle ways in which the community participated in its own destruction. She described the pervasive atmosphere of fear, the constant suspicion, the reluctance to question authority, and the blind faith in religious dogma. The community's collective delusion allowed the injustices to continue, the accusations to mount, and the executions to proceed. Each execution served as a reinforcement of the existing narrative, solidifying the belief in demonic influence and justifying further acts of persecution. Through her detailed accounts, Abigail laid bare the horrifying consequences of unchecked power, religious zealotry, and mass hysteria. Her journal served not only as a testament to her own suffering, but also as a damning indictment of a society that allowed itself to be consumed by fear, superstition, and a ruthless thirst for retribution. The unjust accusations weren't simply isolated incidents. They were the result of a complex interplay of social, political, and psychological factors, a chilling demonstration of the dark side of human nature. The legacy of Salem, therefore, was not simply a historical event. It was a warning, a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the destructive potential of mass hysteria, and the fragility of justice in the face of fear. Her final entries, now more cryptic than ever, hinted at the underlying darkness, suggesting that the trials were not only a product of societal failings but also a carefully orchestrated ritual, one that tapped into ancient, malevolent forces that resonated with the fear and suffering of the victims. The weight of this revelation, Amelia realized, was far greater than she could have imagined. Amelia traced the faded ink, her breath catching in her throat. Abigail's final entries weren't simply accusations. They were coded messages, whispers of a conspiracy far grander and more sinister than the simple witch hunts. The narrative shifted, the focus moving from the individual victims to the shadowy figures pulling the strings. The journal suggested that the accusations weren't random outbursts of religious fervor, but rather carefully orchestrated moves in a deadly game of power. Abigail's keen eye had perceived the subtle machinations of the town's elite, those who wielded influence behind the veil of piety. She detailed the clandestine meetings, the whispered conversations in darkened rooms, the exchange of coded messages hidden within seemingly innocuous letters. These weren't gatherings of righteous individuals purging evil. They were gatherings of ambitious men seeking to consolidate their power and eliminate their rivals. The witch trials, Abigail implied, served as a convenient tool to silence dissent, seize property, and settle old scores. The journal identified several key figures. Thomas Putnam, a wealthy landowner with a penchant for acquiring more territory, is revealed as a central player in this conspiracy. His accusations, Abigail suggested, were strategically targeted at those who stood in the way of his land acquisitions. He used the fear of witchcraft as a weapon, silencing his opponents by labeling them as agents of the devil. The accusations weren't based on evidence. They were based on calculated malice and a thirst for personal gain. Another key figure was Reverend Paris, whose ambition and insecurity fueled the flames of hysteria. Abigail portrayed him not as a devout servant of God but as a power-hungry man who manipulated the situation to enhance his own standing within the community. He used his pulpit to spread fear and paranoia, effectively controlling the narrative and silencing any opposition. His daughters, far from innocent victims, were depicted as willing participants in his schemes, their accusations used to secure his position and eliminate his rivals. Abigail's notes described instances where Paris directly coached his daughters, shaping their testimonies to fit his agenda. The journal suggested that the girls' fits and accusations were a performance, a carefully crafted act designed to influence the court and solidify his power. Abigail meticulously chronicled the financial transactions that accompanied the accusations. She described how the wealthy landowners, including Putnam, systematically seized the property of the accused after their convictions and executions. The land, livestock, and possessions of the condemned were swiftly transferred to their accusers, enriching them while leaving the families of the victims destitute. The journal documented the subtle ways in which the legal system was manipulated to facilitate these land grabs. Abigail detailed the lack of due process, the biased judges, and the absence of legal representation, all contributing factors that facilitated the dispossession of the accused. The journal also shone a light on the role of the court officials, who were not impartial arbiters of justice, but willing participants in the conspiracy. Abigail noted the bribes, the threats, and the intimidation tactics used to ensure that the trials yielded the desired outcome. She described how the court officials were complicit in the confiscation of property, sharing in the spoils of the witch hunt. The court, far from being a bastion of justice, was a tool for consolidating power and enriching the elite. Abigail's entries didn't just expose the corruption, they hinted at a deeper, more sinister connection. The journal suggested that the conspiracy was more than just a political power grab. It was a carefully planned ritual, designed to tap into ancient, malevolent energies. She alluded to occult practices, secret societies, and the invocation of dark forces, suggesting that the witch trials were not only a manifestation of societal failings, but also a ritual sacrifice aimed at harnessing supernatural power. The final entries were fragmented, almost unintelligible, filled with cryptic symbols and coded messages that hinted at a larger, hidden narrative. The words pact, sacrifice, and invocation appeared frequently, alongside strange diagrams and symbols that suggested ritualistic practices far removed from the Puritan faith. One chilling entry described a hidden meeting held on Gallows Hill, the site of the executions. Abigail depicted a group of powerful individuals performing a ritualistic sacrifice, offering the lives of the condemned witches to some unseen entity. The ritual was meant to bind the community to a dark power, ensuring the continued success of the conspiracy. The implication was horrifying. The executions weren't simply the culmination of religious hysteria, they were part of a larger ritual, designed to unleash malevolent forces upon the town. Another entry contained a chilling drawing, a pentagram superimposed over a map of Salem, with certain houses marked with specific symbols. These symbols, Abigail noted, corresponded to the homes of the conspirators, suggesting that their residences served as focal points for their dark ritual. The drawing hinted at the existence of a hidden network, a web of interconnected individuals bound together by their shared participation in the conspiracy. Further entries revealed a chilling connection between the Salem witch trials and older, more obscure pagan traditions. Abigail mentioned forgotten rituals, symbols reminiscent of pre-Christian beliefs, and a possible connection to ancient Celtic or even pre-Celtic practices. This was not just a Puritan-driven purge, it was a perversion of ancient beliefs and rituals, a deliberate subversion of sacred traditions for nefarious purposes. The journal's final pages were almost entirely indecipherable, filled with symbols and cryptic phrases that defied immediate interpretation. However, Amelia felt a chilling resonance within the disjointed fragments. The narrative didn't conclude, it abruptly ended, leaving a profound sense of incompleteness and unresolved dread. The suggestion was clear, the conspiracy hadn't ended with the trials, it continued, dormant perhaps, but still capable of re-emerging in a new and terrifying form. The legacy of Salem, then, was not merely the historical event itself, but the lingering shadow of a malevolent force, an unseen power that continued to influence events long after the hangings on Gallows Hill. Amelia shivered, understanding that the story of Salem was far from over, it was merely a chapter in a far more terrifying and enduring saga. The hidden truth, she realized, was more terrifying than any witch's curse. The real evil wasn't in the supernatural, it was in the hearts of men. The weight of Abigail's journal pressed heavily on Amelia's chest, the faded ink a chilling testament to a darkness that refused to remain buried. The revelation of the conspiracy, the calculated malice of the town's elite, had shaken her to her core. But it was the final, cryptic entries, the hints of a lingering curse, that truly unsettled her. She had dismissed them initially as the ravings of a woman facing imminent death, but the recent events in her own life were forcing her to reconsider. It began subtly, a series of unsettling coincidences that sent shivers down her spine. First, there were the recurring nightmares. Vivid, visceral dreams of Gallows Hill, the wind whipping through the skeletal branches of the trees, the air thick with the stench of decay and the cries of the condemned. In these dreams, she wasn't a passive observer, she was a participant, a shadowy figure in the grim procession, her own face obscured by darkness, yet her movements eerily familiar. These dreams left her waking hours haunted, a lingering sense of dread clinging to her like a shroud. Then came the unsettling occurrences in her own home. Objects moved inexplicably. Doors creaked open in the dead of night, revealing empty rooms. Whispers seemed to echo from the shadows, barely audible yet unnervingly distinct. The unsettling feeling of being watched intensified, the cold prickle of unseen eyes settling upon her skin. She felt a presence, something malevolent, residing within the very walls of the old house she had inherited, a palpable sense of unease that clung to her like the clinging scent of wood smoke on a cold winter's evening. One evening, as she sat poring over Abigail's journal, a sudden chill swept through the room, despite the crackling fire in the hearth. The air grew heavy, charged with a tangible darkness. A flickering candle guttered and died, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Amelia gasped, her heart pounding against her ribs, and instinctively reached for the lamp. As the light flickered to life, she saw it, a faint, ethereal glow swirling in the corner of the room, a shimmering, spectral light that seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy. The spectral glow pulsed, then vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Amelia breathless and shaken, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. The strange occurrences weren't confined to her home. While exploring the grounds surrounding the old house, she discovered an ancient, overgrown well, hidden beneath a tangle of vines and brambles. As she peered into the dark depths, a chilling vision flooded her mind, a fleeting image of a young woman, her face contorted in agony, her hands clawing at the cold, unforgiving stone. The vision was fleeting, gone in an instant, but the image burned itself onto her memory, leaving her with a sickening sense of dread. The well, she realized, felt charged, resonating with the same chilling energy she'd felt in her home. The escalating events caused her to revisit Abigail's journal, paying closer attention to the final entries, the cryptic symbols and coded messages. She began to decipher the symbols, aided by old grimoires and texts on early American folklore that she had found in the dusty archives of the local historical society. The symbols were a mix of Puritan religious iconography and older, pagan symbols, hinting at a dark fusion of the two, a perversion of both faiths to serve a sinister purpose. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to unravel the mystery. The symbols, she discovered, were not merely decorative, they formed a complex ritual, a dark invocation intended to bind the town of Salem to a malevolent entity. The ritual, Abigail's notes revealed, had been performed on Gallows Hill, utilizing the executions as a sacrifice to enhance its power. The curse, it seemed, wasn't confined to the victims, it had taken root within the very soil of Salem, clinging to the town like a malevolent shadow, influencing events and lives for generations. The cryptic entries spoke of a Crimson Covenant, a pact made between the conspirators and a powerful, ancient entity. The entity's name was never explicitly mentioned, but the descriptions hinted at a being of immense power, capable of manipulating fate and controlling events from the shadows. Abigail's notes suggested that the covenant was renewed with each generation, requiring a sacrifice to maintain its power. The absence of a clear victim in her own time meant she could only surmise that the curse was somehow tied to her lineage, a chilling continuation of the ancient pact. Amelia traced the lines of a faded diagram in the journal, a rough sketch of a pentagram superimposed over a map of Salem. Several houses were marked with unique symbols, each corresponding to a key player in the conspiracy. One symbol, a crimson teardrop, was marked prominently on a house remarkably similar to her own. The chilling implication was inescapable. She, a direct descendant of one of the conspirators, was now the unwilling key to renewing the Crimson Covenant. The ancient darkness wasn't simply haunting her, it was seeking to claim her as its next vessel. The journal also contained a disturbing account of a particular amulet, a piece of dark obsidian shaped like a twisted serpent, described as a focal point for the ritual. The amulet was never found after the trials. Abigail claimed this amulet served as the conduit for the malevolent entity's influence. This amulet, the journal hinted, was essential to the continuation of the Crimson Covenant. Amelia's research led her to discover another unsettling detail, a hidden chamber beneath her house, hinted at in a barely visible note in Abigail's journal. The note described a hidden passage leading to a chamber beneath the oldest part of the house, a secret space where the conspirators had conducted their dark rituals. Armed with a shovel and a growing sense of dread, she began digging. After hours of exhausting work, she uncovered a loose stone slab in the cellar floor. Beneath it, a damp, dark passage yawned open, a cold breath of stale air emanating from its depths. With a trembling hand, Amelia lit her lantern and descended into the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the silence broken only by the drip of water echoing in the stillness. The passage led to a small, circular chamber, its walls lined with strange symbols identical to those in Abigail's journal. In the center of the chamber, nestled upon a crumbling stone altar, lay the obsidian serpent amulet, its surface gleaming with an unnatural light. As Amelia reached for the amulet, a guttural growl echoed through the chamber, the air growing frigid. A shadowy form coalesced before her, a grotesque mockery of human form, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. The entity, the one Abigail had described in her cryptic entries, had been awakened. The Crimson Covenant was about to be renewed. The curse, which had lingered for centuries, was now poised to unleash its full, terrifying wrath. The legacy of Salem was no longer a historical footnote. It was a living, breathing nightmare that threatened to consume Amelia and everything she held dear. Her struggle to unravel the truth had unwittingly unleashed something far more sinister, something ancient and malevolent that had been sleeping for centuries, patiently waiting for its chance to reclaim its power. The fight for survival had begun. The obsidian serpent pulsed in Amelia's hand, its cold surface sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the damp chill of the hidden chamber. The entity, a swirling vortex of shadow and malice, loomed before her, its form shifting and indistinct, yet undeniably menacing. It hissed, a sound that resonated deep within her bones, a primal fear that transcended reason. This was not a simple ghost story. This was something ancient, something powerful, something that had fed on the fear and despair of Salem for centuries. Amelia, despite the terror that clawed at her insides, refused to yield. Abigail's sacrifice, her desperate plea for justice, echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve. This wasn't just about her survival, it was about breaking the curse, about righting the wrongs of the past, about giving Abigail, and the other innocent victims, a measure of peace. She had come too far to back down now. Clutching the amulet, Amelia remembered a passage in Abigail's journal, a whispered prayer, a counter-ritual designed to weaken the entity's hold. It was a desperate gamble, a long shot based on fragmented clues and cryptic symbols, but it was her only hope. The prayer, written in a mixture of Latin and a dialect of Algonquian, was a desperate invocation of the spirits of the land, a plea for their intervention against the malevolent entity that had corrupted their sacred grounds. With trembling hands, Amelia began to recite the prayer, her voice barely a whisper against the entity's guttural growls. The words felt alien, yet powerful, as if they resonated with an ancient energy that pulsed in sync with the amulet. As she spoke, the air crackled with unseen energy, the shadows swirling around her, taking on fleeting shapes, monstrous and terrifying. The entity recoiled, its form flickering and wavering, as if the prayer's power was weakening its grip on the chamber. The ritual demanded a sacrifice, a counter-offering to the entity's dark demands. Abigail's journal hinted at a symbolic sacrifice, something that represented the broken trust and the injustices of the past. Amelia's gaze fell upon a small, tarnished silver locket hanging from her neck, a relic from her grandmother, a woman who had always spoken of the weight of the Salem legacy. It was a symbol of her family's connection to the past, a link to the very lineage that had inadvertently drawn her into this terrifying ordeal. With a heavy heart, Amelia removed the locket, a wave of sadness washing over her as she relinquished a tangible connection to her family history. This was a necessary act, a symbolic severing of the ties that bound her to the curse. She placed the locket on the stone altar beside the obsidian serpent, feeling the weight of her sacrifice as she offered it to the spirits. As the prayer neared its conclusion, the air grew charged with energy. The shadows coalesced into a tangible entity, its form becoming clearer, more defined. It was horrifying in its grotesque reality, a twisted amalgamation of human and something far more sinister, its eyes burning with furious rage. Yet, beneath the rage, Amelia sensed a hint of fear, a weakening of the entity's power. The final words of the prayer spilled from Amelia's lips, and a blinding light erupted from the amulet, enveloping the chamber. The entity screamed, a raw, piercing sound that shook the very foundations of the house, and its form began to disintegrate, its shadowy essence fading into the light. The light intensified, burning away the darkness, cleansing the chamber of its malevolent energy. When the light finally subsided, the entity was gone, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and a lingering sense of peace. The obsidian serpent amulet, no longer pulsating with malevolent energy, lay inert on the altar, its dark surface dulled, its power extinguished. Amelia felt a profound sense of relief, a weight lifting from her shoulders, as if a century of darkness had finally been lifted. She picked up the amulet, its coldness now devoid of any sinister power. It was just a stone, a dark reminder of the horrors that had been, but no longer a conduit for evil. Leaving the amulet behind, she ascended back into the house, the oppressive atmosphere of the hidden chamber replaced by a strange, almost palpable lightness. The house felt different, cleansed, as if the malevolent presence that had clung to its walls for generations had finally been expelled. The next few weeks were spent consolidating her findings. She painstakingly documented her discoveries, cataloging the symbols, translating the remaining fragments of Abigail's journal, and meticulously detailing the ritual and its subsequent counter-ritual. She collaborated with the local historical society, sharing her findings and ensuring the information was preserved and understood in a way that wouldn't lead to further danger. The town's response was mixed. Some were skeptical, dismissing her claims as the ramblings of a troubled descendant. Others, however, were open to the possibility, especially those who had experienced their own unexplainable occurrences. Amelia's efforts were not solely focused on historical records. She also reached out to religious leaders and scholars, seeking insights into the ancient pagan and Puritan elements woven into the ritual. Their insights helped shed light on the entity's nature and its origins, revealing a dark history far older than Salem itself. She discovered that the entity was not unique to Salem. It was a parasitic entity that fed on societal fears and historical trauma, using the power of human belief and the desperation of its victims to sustain itself. Amelia's work ultimately led to a deeper understanding of Salem's history, not just the infamous witch trials but the underlying currents of fear, religious extremism, and social injustice that had created the perfect breeding ground for the entity's power. Her research culminated in a comprehensive report, which she shared with the local authorities and academic institutions, offering a nuanced and far-reaching interpretation of the historical events. The report detailed the entity's methods, its vulnerabilities, and the potential for similar entities to exist elsewhere, fueled by unresolved historical trauma and collective fear. The report also offered a cautionary tale, a testament to the lasting impact of historical injustices and the importance of confronting the past to prevent the resurgence of ancient evils. Her work wasn't just about breaking a curse, it was about healing the wounds of a community, acknowledging the suffering of its victims, and preventing such horrors from ever repeating themselves. The legacy of Salem, once a symbol of fear and oppression, was transformed into a testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of the human spirit, and the importance of acknowledging and confronting the darker aspects of our collective history. The fight was over, but the lessons learned would resonate for generations to come. The truth, finally revealed, was far more potent and enduring than any ancient curse.
If you've made it this far, you've heard the whispers. The static doesn't lie. If something felt too close tonight, it probably was. Subscribe for more tales that reach through the dark. Drop a comment below. What time is it right now where you are? And who's watching with you?